Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in this Thursday in April. Thank you, thank you. We have a great day today. It's our annual symposium here in Region 13. We have a great speakers with a lot of knowledge and information for you guys. Thank you for being here with us. You know us, thank you. Again, we are Partner Research Network. My name is Veronica Perez, and I'm the Regional 13 Coordinator for Partner Research Network. Also, we have with us today Alejandra Barker. She's our Project Director for Team Project here at Partner Research Network. Alejandra, you want to say something before we start talking about partners?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Just wanted to thank everyone for being here this morning. I hope that you come prepared to learn a lot of good information from all of our wonderful 4 speakers and also our exhibitors. And I hope you enjoy it, and feel free to reach us out if you need any assistance and if you have any questions or concerns as well. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you for being here. And if you are new, we are going to tell you who Partner Research Network is and what we do, all right, guys? Partner Research Network is the parent training and information centers for Texas. We are funded by the Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and we provide free resources and training for parents of children with disabilities and youth with disabilities that we call them self-advocates. Our mission is to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities with special healthcare needs. We serve parents of children with disabilities and youth with disabilities from the ages of 0 to 26 years old. Partner Research Network was first founded in 1986, and now we have 4 projects serving parents, but we are all part of the same family, Partners Research Network. And I'm in Region 13. Team Project is the red area that you can see in the map. So Region 13 is the Austin area, and then we have Region 20, that's San Antonio, and Region 1, that's the Rio Grande Valley area. That's the Team Project, and Alejandra is the project director of us. Our services are free, and we offer parent workshops, youth workshops, webinars, information and referrals, one-on-one technical assistance, supporting the AR meetings. We do these IEP clinics, and once a year we do a symposium like today, Navigating Special Education Symposium. And also we offer parent leadership training, youth leadership training, and access to social media resources. So for today, your microphone and your camera is off. So if you have any question, please type it in the chat box or in the Q&A area, and we are going to be trying to answer all your questions during the presentation, at the end of the presentation, during the presentation. But if we don't have the time or we don't know the answer, we can email you guys with the response. This webinar is being recorded, and we are going to share it in our Facebook pages later on. Also, this presentation is specifically the first one. Alison has a YouTube channel, and she also, Consolidated Planning Group, share this recording. At the end of the symposium, you are going to receive a survey. This is an evaluation. It's very important to us to help us fill that evaluation form. It only takes a few minutes to do it. And with that, we improve. We appreciate a lot your feedback. And also we report to our grant, and we can continue give you guys free all the things that we do for free. We do not provide CEUs, but we can give you a certificate of attendance. If you need a certificate of attendance, type it in the chat box or email me, and we can do that for you. All right. We'll stop my sharing. My information is in the chat box. I just type it there, my email and my phone number. Alejandra also put the information in the chat box. Allison also put her information in the chat box. So thank you, Allison. We have Allison Schaberg with Consolidated Planning Group here with us talking about waivers this morning. She is a financial planner and a founder of the Consolidated Planning Group. She is wonderful. She has more than 25 years of experience working with families with special health needs. And she also is a mom. She's a parent of kids with disabilities, and she has a lot of knowledge in the financial kind of area and a lot of things about transition. So thank you, Allison, for being with us today and talking with us.
Thank you, Veronica. As always, it's a pleasure to be back with you, and we love what you guys do and share in the advocacy world for families with disabilities. So thank you again for having us. So as she said, I'm Alison Scarborough, Consolidated Planning Group, and we do have a YouTube channel that all of our webinars live on, and really most of those webinars were born out of frustration, right? So as she said, you know, I've been doing this a long time. I eat, sleep, and breathe this both personally and professionally as it relates to planning for special needs, kind of thinking about some of these concerns, and it's a lot to think about. And as I was navigating this with my first daughter, who was, you know, transitioning, I found it unnecessarily difficult. I found it frustrating, the relentless pursuit of information as parents that we have to do all the time just to not accidentally mess things up. So that's how these webinars were born. And on our YouTube channel, it's in the chat box. All of our webinars live out there, and past webinars and any future webinars that are scheduled, once they happen, they go to the YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to that for free. So today, we are talking about special needs planning in the area of Medicaid waivers, SSI eligibility, and preserving those benefits. So when I think about some of these waivers, I think of buzzwords in this community, and waivers and interest lists and the waiting list, and all of these things are some terms that people throw around as it relates to people with disabilities, and it starts being a little bit confusing. So today we're talking about waivers, and when you think of waivers, you should think of Medicaid waivers, because that's what these are. These are waivers through the state of Texas. All states have different waivers. There are various waivers because most programs, Medicaid programs, are operated through the state. And so there is a kind of a varying degree. So if you're on here and you happen to be in another state, your state has waivers too, and they might be a little bit different, but have the same premise. Another thing to know about some of these waivers is that each state has varying degrees of interest list. And what I mean is how long it's going to take to get approved for one of these waivers. Some states, like Arizona, for instance, they don't have a waiting list. Other states, their waiting list, Texas being one of them, Florida is another one. The waiting list and how long it's going to take a person to actually get one of these waivers is very, very long, upwards of 15 years. We've even heard longer. And two states that we know are long on that would be Texas and Florida. There's others, but those are ones that are critically long. So some of these waivers, I just wanted to kind of go through, because another thing that our community does is we have acronyms for everything. And so if you don't know, I mean, people are just throwing around these acronyms, and it is enough to drive anybody crazy. So we've got Community Living Assistance and Support Services. Actually, some people know the acronym and they don't even know what the acronym stands for. So, and that's going to be your class waiver. We've got the DBMD, that is the hardest one to say fast, the deaf blind with multiple disabilities. We've got Home and Community-Based Services, HCS, the Texas Home Living, TX-HML, Medically Dependent Children's Program, which is MDCP. And then we have the STAR Plus waiver, also known as the 1115 demonstration waiver. We have the Youth Empowerment Services, which is the YES waiver, and the Community First Choice CFC waiver. Oops, I went a little bit too far. Let me get back here. I think I went a lot too far. There we go. So, so in talking about some of these waivers, what do you have to do to qualify for these waivers? And they each have some different qualifications, so you need to be aware of which ones your loved one might qualify for, and just know that it doesn't necessarily hurt to be on an interest list for something that you might not necessarily qualify for, because you might not qualify now, but you could qualify later. So community living assistance, the class waiver, this is home and community-based supports to children and adults with related conditions. There's over 200 related conditions like cerebral palsy, spina bifida. The related condition must have occurred before the child was age 22 for the class waiver. We've got the deaf blind with multiple disabilities, and that's just it. Deaf and blind with some sort of other disability. That's the DBMD. So there's a smaller population that actually qualifies for this particular waiver. One that we hear a lot about class. We hear a lot about HCS. We hear a lot about Mdcp, home and community-based services. This is going to give services and supports to children and adults with intellectual disability or a related condition who live with their families in their own homes or in small group homes with no more than 4 people, home and community-based services. Then we've got medically dependent children's program. This gives services to children and adults who are 20 and younger who are medically fragile as an alternative to receiving services in a nursing facility. So we start talking, we throw all these terms around, we start talking about these waivers. But do you know how many times people ask me, what do these waivers even do? Why do I even need this waiver? Why do I even want this waiver? What is the whole point of these waivers to begin with? And the point of the waivers is to provide supports in one's community. There's been a lot of studies done for individuals with disabilities that they are better in their home environment or in their community environment with home and community-based services. And so these waivers are designed to waive off the cost of some of the services that might be needed to make the person able to stay in their home and community-based setting, as opposed to a residential institutional setting. So that is the first things first, and what they're trying to accomplish with some of these waivers. Each of these waivers have different budgets. We actually have a spreadsheet on that one, and we can attach that when we send out an email to everybody that has kind of a checklist of what each of the waivers do and what their budgets are and things like that. And when I send it, it's going to look like it's outdated, but it hasn't been updated through the state of Texas. We've actually checked on that. But each of these waivers have different budgets. Some of the budgets are bigger than others. So this is just kind of the breakdown we kind of looked at. And so we go here, and then so we're going to talk about the STAR Plus home and community-based services. This gives services to adults over age 21 to keep their own community and not in a nursing home facility. Texas Home Living, this gives services to children and adults with intellectual disability or related condition who live in their own homes or their family's home. When we're talking about intellectual disability, basically when we're talking about that, we're talking about people with IQ scores typically 70 or below. We can see 75 or below. With multiple disabilities, I hear people throw 69 and below. I've heard some of the local intellectual authorities kind of talk about 69 and below, but basically that's the IQ score that they're looking at for a lot of these waivers. The Youth Empowerment Services waiver, I do like to talk about this because this is basically the only waiver in the state of Texas that mostly doesn't have a waiting list. And I don't know why. I don't know it's because if people don't know about it or I'm not really sure. So anyway, I'm glad that the yes waiver is something that it has, more availability than some of these others, but it's a Medicaid program that gives home and community-based services, children under the age of 19 with serious mental, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. Now, with the yes waiver, so I always say think alphabet soup with youth empowerment services, the yes waiver. Think mental health, bipolar, BPD, ADHD, ADD, ODD, oppositional defiance disorder. Think about runaway, DMDD, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. Some kids that maybe have anger and aggression. Maybe they have had some trouble with the law. And I'm not saying all of these things. It could be any number of these things. Maybe they've been getting in fights at school, things like that. But this waiver, what I want to be clear on is that the mental health issues need to be the primary diagnosis. It's not the primary diagnosis is low functioning autism or something else that's way more severe than the mental health side of it. So this is more for the mental health side. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time on this one just for a second, because it is good. It's a wraparound program. And again, we're trying to keep kids out of hospitalizations for mental health crisis, out of residential facilities, for mental health crisis. That's the point of this youth empowerment. And we've seen a huge rise all across the country, definitely in Texas, everywhere, with mental health crises and things not going well, living in the pandemic for 2 years. So just know that this is out there. And this Medicaid eligibility, a lot of these waivers, some people think, well, we make too much money. So you do have to be Medicaid eligible to qualify for these waivers. But most of the Medicaid eligibility in this example is based off the child's assets, not yours. So don't assume that if you have a child under 18 that they can't qualify for these waivers, because that is not the case. Community First Choice allows states to provide home and community-based attendance services and supports to Medicaid recipients with disabilities. It helps with the activities of daily living, health-related tasks through hands-on assistance and supervision, and services to help the individual learn how to care for themselves. So what do these waivers pay for? So why do we need the waivers? What do these waivers do? And again, these are some services that are available in all waivers, but basically one of the things that I think of is think therapy, all types of therapy, art therapy, music therapy, equine therapy, massage therapy, OT, PT, speech therapy. All of these are types of therapies that may be covered under the waiver. There could be they call it attendant hours or nursing hours, respite hours. There could be minor home modifications that are necessary, supported employment, employment assistance, financial management services. So there's a whole lot of things that you can get in the waiver. And if you're already getting a waiver, one thing I want to mention to you is a lot of families are not fully utilizing their budgets for their waivers. They're not fully utilizing the services, and you want to try to fully utilize them as much as you can. One thing that I will also say that has been an ongoing, I hate to use the word crisis, but it is a crisis. Families that have been getting these waivers have really, really, really been struggling to staff their attendant hours, respite hours, nursing hours, et cetera. Because there has been, there is a shortage. There is an attendant shortage all across the country, including Texas. And there are some different options with the waivers where you can hire your own caregivers as opposed to going through an agency, things like that. But just know that if you're in that category right now and you're struggling, you're definitely not alone. It's not just you. It's not just your agency that's horrible. There are some horrible agencies out there, but the agencies are drowning. They're drowning trying to find qualified staff and maintaining them, because that is another issue. They can hire them, but the rates of pay are so low they can't keep them. So that is some of the issues. Okay, So we talked about some of this: transportation services, residential services, equine therapy, day habs. I'm thinking of some of like the transition programs or things like that. I see somebody in the chat box said, can we get a list of the waivers on community class and home and HCS waiver, a list of the waivers. So everybody that's on this is going to get a copy of today's slides and the recording, so you don't have to take copious notes and write all this down. You are going to get a PDF of these slides, and if there's any links that we talk about or good websites, you'll have a clickable link that you can go to as well. How do you get on these waivers list? And I am coming to that in just 1 second, because that is a great question, and a lot of people have that same one. So waiver general eligibility. Most waivers are for all ages except for Mdcp and Star Plus. Those are the exceptions. What is the financial eligibility? Because so the key thing that you got to understand, again, and I said it at the beginning, I want to say it again because there is some confusion with this. You got to stay Medicaid qualified, okay? In order to have one of these waivers, you have to be eligible for Medicaid. So sometimes I have affluent families that say, hey, we have enough money to cover our child's needs. What do we even care about SSI or Medicaid? Why do we even want that? And my answer is you do. You want to stay eligible for Medicaid, so that way, when your loved one comes up on the list that they're eligible for the waiver, that they can actually get it. Some of these waiver budgets are $140,000 a year. So think about all those therapies and all of those programs and these day habs and other programs that you're paying for out of pocket. A lot of these things can be covered by the waiver, and that's why you want to maintain that eligibility. So for all waivers except for Texas Home Living, you basically got to be 300% of SSI. And that number, so current number for SSI right now is $841 a month. So the number of 300% of SSI is 2523 for 2022. So and individuals must meet the functional eligibility criteria for the specific waiver. So each waiver has a little bit different of functional criteria. You can read about these waivers, and and Veronica, if you want to put this in the chat box for me, Navigate Life Texas is a good website that you can read a little bit more about these waivers. And another place that you can check out is that the Health and Human Services website for Texas also has a lot more information on there about those waivers. The key thing that you have to know is get your loved one on the list. Eligibility is not determined until an individual comes to the top of the wait list. So you don't have to prove that your loved one is eligible to put them on the list, right? And sometimes people come up on the list and they don't take their slot for whatever reason. Maybe they've got something else going on or whatever, but your eligibility will be determined when you come up on the list, not when your name goes on the list. Okay, so I see we've got the Navigate Life Texas. That website's just a good website in general for people to get on the list. For special needs resources in general. I'm sorry. So two funding paths for waivers. We've got the interest list or the wait list is first come first serve. Statewide the wait can be as long as 14 years. Recently we've heard that it's longer than that. We've known people that have been on the list for 17 years. I know that my kids have been on the list for 12 or 13 years, and so we're not getting one yet either. So we, as far as, promoting independence, it's going to prevent or divert individuals from institution. It addresses crisis, and it helps individuals that might be transitioning out of an institution into home and community-based services. So those are the kind of the why behind it. So someone asked, how do I get on the wait list? So I don't know, you didn't ask for my opinion, but I'm going to give it. The interesting thing in Texas is we're this giant state, and just huge. And the way that you get on these interest lists, like nowadays with technology, we would think that there would be this website and that we could create a username and password, and then we can put our loved one on the list, and then we could log into that and look and see exactly where our loved ones are on the list. And it doesn't really work like that. That would be too easy. So basically how you get on the list is your LIDA or LIDA, however you want to call it. It stands for Local Intellectual Developmental Disability Authority. Contact your local LIDA, and it's by county. So whatever county you live in is your local LIDA. And Veronica, if you could put the local one in the chat box for you guys. I know like Harris County, a lot of them are called MHMR. They were formerly called MHMR for a very long time. Some of them still are. A lot of them have changed their names. In Harris County, it's the Harris Center. In Fort Bend County, it's Texana. There's Blue Bonnet. There's a lot of different local authorities. But you're going to want to contact your local authority to get on the HCS, the Texas Home Living, the Community First Choice, those waivers. But then there is a separate phone number for Mdcp, class, and DBMD. So one thing that happens for families that we've talked to before, they say, my child is on all of the list, when in all actuality, all they've done is called the local authority, and they've put them on the list that the local authority handles. But their child might not be on the list for Mdcp, class, or DBMD, and they might not be on the Star Plus. So there's a separate phone number for that. So this website here, to find out who your local authority is, if you put that in your browser, it's going to ask you to put your zip code in for your home address, and it is going to tell you exactly who your local authority is. And so to find out where your child is on the list, if they've been on the list for years, you are going to call your local authority and simply ask them to look up and see where your child is on the list. They're supposed to reach out. They've tried really hard to do that. Some local authorities are doing better than others. Some of them have been short-staffed. Sometimes they reach out by mail. Sometimes they reach out by phone to find out if your loved one still wants to be on the list. It's important for you to say yes. It's important for you to respond. It's important for you to know that if you move from one county to the other, you have a new local authority and you need to get your case transferred over to the new local authority. You don't lose your place in line, but you do need to move over to the new local authority. So I see a question in the chat box today. It says, how does my adult child stay Medicaid eligible when my husband and I start drawing Social Security and our daughter draws more money than she currently gets with SSI, since you can only have $2,000 to keep Medicaid? And that is a fabulous question. And so the answer to that is there is something called the Pickle Amendment, just like a pickle like you would eat. There was a senator with the last name Pickle, and this amendment was named after him. But basically what the Pickle Amendment is if a person was qualified for SSI and Medicaid first, and then the parents retire and they switch over to Social Security disability under the parent's record, you're probably going to have to reapply for Medicaid. But basically the Medicaid, they're not going to allow that particular individual because they switched over because a parent retired to lose Medicaid under the Pickle Amendment. So that's how you're going to keep that. So that's an important thing, and that's an important question that a lot of people ask, and a lot of people wonder about that. But you may have to reapply for Medicaid, but the Pickle Amendment will allow you to keep it. But one thing is important to understand in this example: it is real important that that person got Medicaid first under SSI, that they were getting Medicaid first, because if they weren't and the parent retires first, that loved one is going to be eligible for Medicare after 2 years, but they won't be eligible for that Pickle Amendment that we're talking about. So we are nationally certified as Social Security advisors. We have a specialized software that actually tells us exactly how and when to pull the trigger on Social Security for parents that are retiring, and how to maintain those benefits, not only maintain them, maintain Medicaid eligibility, but maximize those benefits for the parents as well as the individual with a disability. Okay. So one thing that I do like to talk about is the crisis diversions. So we've talked about the long waiting list and, you know, how long it might take before a person ever gets a waiver. There are such things as crisis diversion slots, like an HCS crisis diversion waiver. So if your loved one is in crisis, and when I think of crisis, here's what I want to think about. Here's what I want you to think about. There's a lot of levels of crisis. Crisis could have been our home flooded in Harvey. Crisis could have been a caregiver has become incapacitated or died. Or one parent caregiver has become sick and cannot work anymore, and the other caregiver has to go to work. Those are examples that could be a crisis. It also could be a crisis that the individual is a threat to themselves or others. That there are safety issues in the home. Those are some other examples of crisis. I've seen a lot of crisis over the years, but a lot of times people don't know that there is a crisis diversion slot where you go from you might have 15 years left on the waiting list to right now you get the waiver. It's not an easy process. Your first point of contact in the event of crisis, and they all have 24/7 crisis lines at your local authority. They'll help with the process. And they'll, you know, make sure that you're all involved in the process. I have heard of some local authorities that have done a really great job and have made these crisis diversion slots available and go through and have walked with the families to make this happen. And then I've heard of families that really truly did deserve a crisis diversion slot. They didn't get it, or for lack of a better term, they felt like they were beating their head against the wall with their local authority. So there is help above and beyond the local authority. We were able to get 2 families a crisis diversion slot last year. They definitely did need them. We did have to go above and beyond the local authority in both cases, but there are some agencies that we partner with that help families just like yours in that situation to get that. So the PASRR diversion and transition from nursing facilities and specialized services, that exists as well. Okay. I'm assuming that the Pickle Amendment only applies if you have guardianship over your child. No, not necessarily. In the Social Security Administration, where that Pickle Amendment is going to play is if the child's disability started prior to age 22, they were getting SSI and Medicaid, because in the eyes of the Social Security Administration, if the individual's disability started prior to age 22, the individual can be covered under a parent's record for Social Security disability when the parent either retires themselves under Social Security or they turn on their Social Security disability benefits. So that's where that would apply. It doesn't really apply. It's questionable. There's a lot of, I always say that there's a lot of ifs and buts and exceptions to every rule, and for, you know, we can get in the weeds on some of the one-off situations, you know, if you need help with that. But you do not have to have guardianship of over your adult child in that situation. A lot of families don't. Okay, so I see another question in the chat box that says, I might have misunderstood, but I thought that you said that you have to sign up for class and some of the other waivers somewhere else. And where do I sign up for those? So I'm gonna go back on that slide here. And so there's this is going to be an important slide. And again, you're going to get an email with this, but you've got the Mdcp class and DBMD. I told you I can't say that fast. the phone number there. Your local authority is going to be the HCS, Texas Home Living Community First Choice. Then, in your local authority, you're going to put your zip code in here. And then it's going to tell you who your local authority is. And then here's the star plus. So thank you for asking that.
And in the chat box, Allison, I put the contact for Travis County. He's calling Terra Care, and I put all the information in there. And for other counties, we have Blue Bonnet Trails, but we have for Bastrop, Burnett, Caldwell, Fayette, Gonzales, Guadalupe, Lee, and Williamson. That goes through Blue Bonnet Trails. That's for Region 13 contacts. But if you are out of that counties, please just use these links that Allison shared with you guys, and you are going to find your local authority office and contacts. You know, put it in your zip code. You put your zip code.
Yeah, it's super easy. It's like one click. Like you go to this website, you put your zip code in, you press go, and there you have it. So it is super easy. So this is the important link for that, and important to keep in mind again. That if you move, you need to, check that out again. Let's see what I'm doing here. Okay. All right. So when it comes to, how do I get started with special needs planning? We've got a lot of webinars on this, and I always say that there's a whole rabbit trail on every topic that there could be, and wait, there is on our YouTube channel, a whole webinar on that particular topic, and we never have enough time to, hit all of the pieces of everything. But in our webinars, we strive to empower you and equip you with the tools and resources you need to navigate, this journey. But so some of the questions that we get, how do I start with special needs planning? What is special needs planning anyway? We have families that contact us on pretty regular basis that say, I have a loved one that's going to have care needs the rest of their life, not just mine. I'm scared of what's going to happen when I'm gone. How do I plan for the future? How do I know how much money we need to set aside for their future in a special needs trust? How do we make sure that that money isn't going to cause them to lose benefits? And so we're able to help with all of that. Of course, we're able to do those specialized cost calculations, like a future care cost estimate, the Social Security analysis that tells you how and when to pull the trigger, and how basically all of the planning that we do is designed to make you be okay and have a fulfilling retirement and not run out of money, but to make sure that there is enough money in the right buckets to fund the future care for your loved one with a disability, whether you're incapacitated or no longer here on this earth, is basically what that's behind. So we want you to work with a special needs planner to formulate your plan. What is the difference? As a special needs planning firm, we have all the same licenses that other financial planners do, but we have additional certifications such as National Social Security Advisor, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy, and 30 years of experience in working with special needs families. I think it's important to understand that your situation is specialized, so it's important to work with a specialist that does understand having the money in the right buckets, and how important it is, not just while you're alive, but when you pass and you leave an inheritance, how to leave those things properly so it doesn't cause your loved one to lose Medicaid eligibility, or lose their waiver, lose their SSI, or any of the other benefits that they might be getting. So you need to understand the difference between a special needs planner and a special needs attorney. We do have a webinar on that. I like to summarize that quickly, that we're the money and that they're the paper. So we work very closely with special needs attorney. I'm not an attorney. We have people that call us every day and say, I need you to help me get guardianship. I need you to help me set up a special needs trust. And we work and we refer to attorneys that we know are qualified and good and specialized in special needs all day long. But there's the paper, they're the legal documents, they're the guardianships, the special needs trust, the wills, the power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, supported decision-making agreements, things like that. And we're the money that, you can have a special needs trust if it's not funded or you don't know how it's going to be funded. not necessarily worth the paper that it's written on. So those are things to look at. Excuse me. Where the future care cost estimates, where the overall financial plan of how do I retire and not run out of money and have enough money left over for my loved one with a disability. We're going to want you to gather all the planning documents. What are these? These are all of your statements. Your Social Security statement, your full earnings record through Social Security. They've updated their statements. They used to have the full earnings record on the statement, and now you have to download a separate PDF. If you haven't noticed, in the last 15 years or so, they don't mail Social Security statements anymore unless you're over 60. Your Social Security statements are available on ssa.gov. You can put that in the chat box, Veronica, ssa.gov. You can create a username and password, and you can download your Social Security statements and your full earnings record. And word to the wise, please, please, please make a note of your username and password, because if you forget it or you mess it up, you are going to get locked out. And unfortunately, you're going to have to sit on hold for a million years with the Social Security Administration to get it unlocked. And that's if you don't have to go in to get it unlocked. So that's good advice. Develop a letter of intent. A letter of intent, I call it a family love letter, is basically, as a parent, you're telling someone else everything there is to know about your loved one with a disability. We have a template for a letter of intent. It's 19 pages long. It's a form fillable PDF. Just know that as a parent, you have forgot more about your loved one and their needs than anybody else will ever know. So if you're not here or you're incapacitated, somebody else needs to know this information. And sometimes even in our own household, one person is, the primary caregiver, and they're responsible for this information. So the other parent might not even know all of this stuff. So just make sure that you do this. You share it with somebody else that it exists, and you let somebody know where it is. And think about your vision of how you hope things will look for your special needs child, but more importantly, you, yourself, your own retirement. We're going to spend 25 to 35 years in retirement. Well, you know what? Families that have kids that have care needs for the rest of their life, not just ours. Our kids don't sail off into the sunset after college, and we have this life of ease and enjoyment and retirement. It's not that simple. But as families, we need to find balance in that life. Veronica, do we have some questions?
Yes, we have some questions. Some of them you already answer those. We have in the Q&A, it says, I might have misunderstood, but I thought you said you have to sign up for class and some other waivers somewhere else, not LIDA.
Oh,
where did you sign up?
We answered that one. We went back to the slide. We answered that one.
Got it. How often do you update the letter of intent?
That's a great question. And I suggest a couple of times a year, maybe twice a year, maybe you do spring and fall. And it depends on how fluid your kid's condition is, right? Like sometimes we have some families that things change real quickly and rapidly, and so you should update it accordingly. And we have other families that the disability is a permanent disability. It stays about the same. It's not necessarily better. It's not necessarily worse. But as things change, and probably at a minimum a couple of times a year.
Okay, we have a question in the chat box. I don't know if you already answered it, Allison. I'm assuming that Pickle Amendment really only applies if you have a guardianship over your adult child.
We answered that one, and I do see another one. If I change the state, what happens with the waivers? And unfortunately, the answer is you lose it. And if you're changing states, my hope for you is that you're moving to a state that there is not a waiver interest list, that maybe you can get on right away. There are states that are better than others, and we actually have had families that we work with that have moved to other states because it was going to be so long, seemingly endless, before their child was ever going to get a waiver. We've definitely worked with families, and we're aware of some states that are better than others. And to each his own. You move to one state and you get the waiver, but you also have state tax, or you also have, it's like you win some, you lose some. That's for sure.
All right. And how we can look waivers to other states, look up for the waivers in other states?
You can honestly just Google Medicaid waivers, go to that state and whatever it is. If you're going to Arizona, Medicaid waivers, and it'll kind of pop up what website, you know, like in Texas, we have the Texas Health and Human Services, but not all of them have the same website, but that is a good way to look for them.
And about the letter of intent, is there is an outline for the letter of content on what information should be included in that kind of letter?
So so far, I'm just going to include that today to the attendees, and we usually provide that to our clients. But I'll go ahead and include that, the letter of intent, and I also talked about the waiver budget that I'm going to include. So today, you guys are going to get a copy of the slides. You're going to get the waiver budget spreadsheet that I was talking about, and a copy of the letter of intent. And it's form fillable. You can create your own. I don't suggest you handwrite your letter of intent. I do suggest that it be on the computer so it's more easily updated. So we'll put that out there. And you know, and I say, you know, the letter of intent can be emotional because I mean it's right there, out there in front and center, all the stuff that you've been dealing with. You know, when we started having kids, it's not what we thought. You know, it's not how we thought, and we've had a lot of wins. But then sometimes it's hard. It's hard to watch our kids struggle sometimes. You know, and so when you're putting all that down on paper, it can be emotional. So give yourself some space. Set a goal. I'd like to complete this letter of intent within a month or two. You know, spread it out. Don't do a 19-page document in one weekend. I mean, you'll feel drained. But anyway, so one of the things that we talk about is how is our care going to be funded. So we don't have enough time to go deep and wide in this topic. I'm going to hit as much as I can. We have entire webinars on SSI and Social Security, entire webinars on Special Needs Trust, entire webinars on ABLE accounts. So if you need more information about this, I'm going to hit the highlights and I'm going to keep moving. So preserve eligibility for state and federally funded programs, SSI and Medicaid. SSI is a means-based program. People say, my child's getting Social Security. Most of the time, the children, they're getting SSI and Medicaid. And the term Social Security and SSI are not synonymous, okay? SSI, Supplemental Security Income and Medicaid is a means-based program. SSI is $841 a month, and it comes with Medicaid. To get SSI, if your child is a minor, it's based off of your income and assets, so a lot of kids don't qualify. If your child is 18 or over, it is based off of their assets. They can have one house, they can have one car, they can have up to $2,000 assets in their name. Any more than $2,000 assets in their name can be held in a special needs trust or in an ABLE account, and it won't be counted against them. If they're in any other vehicles, they will be counted against them. So any more than $2,000 assets can be in a special needs trust or an ABLE account. It will not count. Social Security or Social Security Disability or SSDI, those terms are synonymous. Social Security, SSDI, Social Security Disability, those terms are synonymous. Social Security is a worker-based program. As you work, you pay into this system. You have working quarters. So when you download your Social Security statement, it tells you how many working quarters you have, and you're paying into this system. Our kids with disabilities that don't work don't pay into this system. So a lot of times what happens when you first apply for SSI and Medicaid, the first letter you get, nobody tells you this, the first letter you get is the denial from the Social Security Administration. And I have people that call me crying. They're so mad, like, how could they even say that this child is not disabled? Are you kidding me? But the truth is you're getting that letter rightfully so. The Social Security Administration is saying little Johnny does not qualify for Social Security because he has not paid into the system, and that is correct. You as a parent are not already getting Social Security or SSDI, and he does not qualify for Social Security. But what they don't tell you is another letter is coming in 2 or 3 weeks, basically telling you that they are approved for SSI and Medicaid. So you're thinking you're just getting denied for everything. It's confusing. And the funny thing is these letters, the SSI letters and the Social Security letters, they look the same. And the key difference is the top of them. One will say SSI, Supplemental Security Income, and the other one will say Social Security, right? So that's how you distinguish that. So don't get confused by that. How do we fund this? How do we fund future care? A lot of families, okay, yes, you could be naturally affluent. You could inherit a lot of money from parents or other family members, and that could fund the trust. But a lot of people they pay for their funding for their loved one out of current assets while they're alive, and upon their passing, their life insurance funds their special needs trust. So where we make the beneficiary of our life insurance the special needs trust for the benefit of little Johnny in that example. An Enable account, this is a 529A. You can contribute $16,000 a year, an additional $12,880 if working. The disability had to begin prior to age 26. We can help you get set up with an ABLE account. So when we're talking about the ABLE account, this is like a 529C. 529Cs are for college. If you have a 529C for your disabled child because you thought they were going to go to college and they're not, you can convert your 529C to a 529A, $16,000 a year. So that's something that you can think about doing, and we can help with that. But so $16,000 a year, $12,880 if the individual is working. Just so you know, I just want to put this out there because some people say, well, how much money can I have in an ABLE account? Well, if you Google that, it's 400 and some odd thousand. It might have gone up for 2022. I know 2021 was like 400,000 that you could have in an ABLE account. But what that didn't tell you is that if you have more than 100,000 in your ABLE account, you're going to disqualify for SSI and Medicaid. You can only have up to $100,000 in an ABLE account. What you can pay for out of an ABLE account is very much not restrictive. If it can be construed as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability, you can pay for it out of an ABLE account. Something to know. You can pay for college. You can pay for tutoring. You can pay for transition schools. You can pay for an iPhone or computer, adaptive equipment, health co-pays, drugs, a respite vacation, something like that. Those are all things that can be paid for out of an ABLE account, and the investments in the ABLE account grow tax-free. So just a little bit on that. So these are things that should be on your special needs planning radar. Again, we have webinars on every single one of these topics. So if we kind of scratch the surface on something that you needed a little bit more information on, you can go to our YouTube channel and check that out. And again, you can subscribe for free for those. Let me just make sure that we hit on everything. I didn't hit on the beneficiary designations. I'm still okay on time. One of the things that I want to talk about that we see as an error, a critical error that many families, even up to like 95% of the families that we run into, do is they make mistakes on beneficiary designations. They also make mistakes of not talking to their aging parents about beneficiary designations. Earlier, I talked to you about the importance of working with a special needs planner. And the reason you want to do that is because we know how to properly structure things, structure accounts, structure beneficiaries, things like that. So that way your loved one is not going to lose eligibility. But what a lot of families do, and if you've done this, you can fix it for free. You don't even need my help. You can call and get a new beneficiary designation form. But what a lot of families do is they have life insurance, they have 401ks, 403bs, pensions, and they set up beneficiaries on these accounts. And what a lot of families do is they name their spouse. So if I die, my spouse is going to get the money. And then they name a secondary beneficiary or a contingent beneficiary that if I die and my first beneficiary is already dead and gone, that's easy. I'm going to divide the money equally amongst my children. That's what people do. And it's wrong. Okay. So a couple of things that you need to know. Number one, we never want to name ever, not as a minor, not as 18 and older, your special needs child outright as a beneficiary. So if their name is John Smith, we never want to put John Smith down as a beneficiary, ever. How we want to leave money to John Smith is we want it to go to the Special Needs Trust for the benefit of John Smith. Then he will preserve his Medicaid eligibility, any waivers that he's on, SSI, etc. So that is a big thing that you need to know. And again, you can fix it, and we can help you with that. The other thing is we do not recommend naming minor children, neurotypical minor children, as beneficiaries. And because if you don't have a trust or point exactly how and when they're going to get the money, when you name a minor beneficiary, if you die, that money is going to sit in trust until they turn 18, and then they're going to get all of the money, which is a horrible idea. I know your kids are brilliant, mine are too, but most 18-year-olds are not equipped to get large sums of money, and if they do, it's gone. It's gone within a year, sometimes months, and so there needs to be a little bit more stipulations on that. But do talk to your aging parents or loved ones or grandparents that are that may leave some type of inheritance, because their financial advisor is not nuanced in special needs. They don't know. And grandma says, I want to leave money to my grandson. And he says, okay. And he writes down John Smith. Okay. That's what happens. And if that happens, is there a fix? There is a fix. The fix is expensive. You have to hire an attorney. You have to get a court order, and you're going to have to get that reallocated to a first party special needs trust for the benefit of your child. And there is going to be a Medicaid payback on that. So it's better to get things set up on the front end. Last thing that I wanted to mention here is that waiting lists for community-based care facilities, whether it's a transition program, residential program, some of these waiting lists can be very long. Some of them could be over 5 years. So think about what your transition plan is. What does it look like? Are they going to go to the 18 plus program? Are they going to stay in the public school till 21 to 22, whatever that is? But find out what next is, because what we don't want is your loved one to come home and have very little interaction with others and not be engaged or involved in something. Veronica, I know that we're basically out of time, but I think we got a few more questions, so I'll take a few more. I always just like to introduce my team, because I'm oftentimes the speaker. A lot of times Michelle is too, but we work on a collaborative team, not pictured or 3 other staff members here, but we are all nuanced in special needs and ready to help you on your journey. And, we're happy to meet you where you are, kind of the planning that you've done so far. There's no such thing as bad planning. The steps that you've already taken, you're one step further on your journey, and we're certainly happy to see that. So here is how you can get a hold of us. This is an appointment link here, and how you can get on our calendar. So you can, and again, you're going to get these slides, so you'll have this. But you can get on our calendar if you have specific questions as it relates to your loved ones and your family. I mentioned our YouTube channel. We've got a Facebook page, and we partner with Veronica and Partners Resource Network all across the state of Texas. But we also have webinars on a weekly basis, so you can sign up, and don't worry, we're too busy to spam people, but once a month you'll get an email. It's kind of a long email, but basically it'll have a list of all of our webinars for the whole month, what the topics are, so you can pick and choose which ones might be relevant to you and the path that you're on. Okay, so let's go to the last questions.
Yeah, we have a question related to the information that you just gave them. Is there a fee for providing assistance to families from your organization, from Consolidated Planning Group?
Sure. Our consultations are always free, so it costs you nothing to have an initial consultation with us. And what we want to do is we want to learn a little bit more about you and your family, what your needs are, and then from there, what we'll do is, we have various doors that families can walk through, because every family is on a different stage of planning and what their needs are. So we will go over during our initial consultation. We'll seek to understand what your needs are, what you've already done, what you've already got in place, and then how our services may be helpful to you, and we'll be able to navigate that together. And after that during that initial consultation, we'll be able to give our suggestions of what you might need and prices specifically related to that.
All right. How do I verify my position on the waiver list? while we call, or how do we confirm where we are at in the list?
That's where you're going to call your local authority. That one slide that had the link to find your local authority. You're also going to call the class number. You got to call the class number separately, your local authority. But that's how you're going to find out. Again, I want there to be a website. I want it to be simple. I want there to be a username and password, and I can just log in and I can see where my kid is on the list. I don't want to call somebody and leave a message and they call me back and then they get my voicemail, but that's the way it is now, for now. Maybe one day I'll advocate to change that, but anyway, not this year.
We have the last question. Can you please provide a website to where to be in applying for SSI? We already put it right there, right?
Yeah, it's ssa.gov. ssa.gov. My recommendation is you work with your local Social Security office. Don't call the national one. Work with your local one.
They open that now, right, Allison?
April 7th. April 7th, they opened their offices. They were closed for 2 years, so you can call. They're very busy, but you can call and schedule an appointment to apply. You can apply online. You can apply over the phone. There are various ways that you can apply for SSI and Medicaid, and we give people tips on kind of how to navigate that and what to do with that for sure.
Thank you so
all right,
much,
yep.
Allison, for all your information. Thank you guys for being with us today, and you will receive an email with all the handouts Allison are going to share with you guys. And if you have more questions, please just let us know, and we're trying to help you the best that we can. So I'm going to stop the recording.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great.
All right, again, welcome Karen, Mayor Cunningham, to our symposium, Navigating Special Education. And you have a lot of experience working and advocating for special healthcare needs students and helping parents, more than 20 years of experience working with families. And you are the CEO of the Special Education Academy. So you're going to be talking about this important topic, communication that builds collaboration with 504 plans and Iep teams. So welcome, Karen, and thank you so much for being here. So do you want me to share the screen?
I'm gonna try to screen share this like I'm an adult. So we'll see how this goes.
All right.
And can you guys see that?
Yeah, you just have to close the window that says Adobe. That
Yes.
one.
Oh, did I mess?
Yeah, let's try to share again.
Let's try again. This is, yes, we did not have screen sharing when I went to school in 1900. Oh, now I can't find it. Let's see. Oh my goodness, there it is. You would think I would be better at this. Can you see that now?
No.
Okay.
No. Stop sharing, and that is going to stop sharing everything, and then try again.
Okay. Let's see. Well, I'm so sorry.
No problem. That's technology now.
Okay. Can you see it now or no?
No.
Okay.
Let me try to share my screen,
Okay.
and then maybe that will help.
Sorry. I didn't go to Adobe Night School.
That's not what I want to share. Let's put mine. Then not try you. Let's see if that helps.
Okay.
Share screen and then.
Okay, share screen.
I'm seeing your desktop, like mine.
Okay, are you seeing that now?
Is your files?
Ms. Cunningham, what you need to do is you need to open the file first, the PDF file first.
Okay,
Then click on share and choose that PDF file from the files you will see on the pop-up screen.
okay. You would think I could do this, right?
It's all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
Did I do it?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
All
Okay,
right.
now I'm supposed to figure out how to make them move, right? Oh, look at that. Look how
Yeah.
smart. Okay. Thank you all for your patience. So thank you all for having me. I appreciate being here. Thank you to PRN. We really love more than anything training people. So again, if we haven't met, I'm Karen Mayor Cunningham, special education boss, helping families navigate and negotiate. Oh, did I just stop that? 504 outcomes. Did I just stop the screen sharing?
Yes, you
I did. That is amazing how I did that. Okay. We're gonna get one last try for the 400th time. And after that, we'll just, okay, let's see. Just hit screen share. I promise you I'm really good at talking, not so good at technology. I don't, okay. There's one. And then screen share. Okay, I think I did it. All right, can you guys see that?
Ale.
No?
Yes, we see that presentation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just gonna get through this. Okay, so thanks you guys. Thank you for your patience. I'm Karen Mayor Cunningham, special education boss, helping all individuals that sit at the 504 IEP table have successful outcomes. And so, you know, the main thing that we want to do is make sure that everyone that sits at the 504 table is equipped. And oh my goodness, I just stopped it again.
Let me help you and see if I can share you your PDF.
Okay.
Let me see. First, I have to open it.
Yeah.
I have it here. Download it. Okay.
Veronica, do you want to stop the recording and start?
Yes, we can do that. We can edit that. Don't worry.
Okay. So you can't be good at everything, right?
Yeah. Let me see if I can do it for you. All right.
Okay, perfect. I'm not going to touch anything. So thanks you guys for having me on today. Greatly appreciate it. I'm Karen Mayor Cunningham, special education boss, helping all that sit at the 504 IEP table navigate successful student outcomes. I am the president of the Special Education Academy. It was really actually birthed out of at the beginning of the pandemic. I remember I would sit at my desktop and we would do just Facebook Lives trying to get people the correct information, really correct information about special education, 504, their rights, and really shared a bunch of TEA guidelines. And so, you know, people want information. When you give people appropriate information, they have the opportunity to make a more informed decision. And so we train everybody. We have on-demand classes, we have virtual classes, we have in-person classes. And we're so excited that probably over 2/3 of the people that attend our training or classes are school-based members. And so, you know, our goal is one thing is successful student outcomes. And that's what you can see on the next slide, successful student outcomes. And my mission statement is when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody. So looking at the next slide, let's talk about when did you initially know something was different, right? When did you know something was different with your child? And I think a lot of us as parents and even as educators, when we're really close to a situation, we don't always consider what's going on with our kiddo. You know, as parents, we have a tendency to compare our kiddos. I remember one time I told somebody that my son rolled over at 9 days, right? I don't know if that's really good, but we have a tendency to compare our kiddos, right? And so when we're talking about a need for something above general education, which would either be a 504 or an IEP, we have to look at what are the differences, right? And so when they're little, what is the difference between their engagement, their eye contact, that playing with other kiddos, meeting those developmental milestones. And so I think that's how we know that there's a difference between our children and other children. The great news is if you think that your child has a difference and you've noticed that something is different, is that you can get them evaluated as early about 2.5 years old if you're looking for special education, or even earlier. We have programs called ECI, Early Childhood Intervention. So when you do know that something's different, you want to go ahead and act on that. So looking at the next slide, how do we respond to that? Right? How do we respond when we think that there's something different? Unfortunately, parenting is learn as you go, right? Our children didn't come with a brochure. I always told my husband, if my kids came with a brochure, I'm sure I left it at the hospital, right? So how do we respond to the need? So if your child is young, before 18 months, and you believe that there's a need, then you would reach out for early childhood intervention. But as it relates to special education and or a need for 504, we're going to respond to the need by reaching out to our school district. And so it might be the campus that you're closest to, or I would even recommend if you're in Dallas Independent School District, I would go ahead and call the administration building and indicate to them that you have a child that's coming up on 3 years of age and you believe that they have a suspected disability. And that's what we're looking at. It doesn't have to be confirmed. You don't have to have a note from a pediatrician or a neurologist. It's a suspected disability. And they will set up a time for you to bring in your child to come in for an assessment, right? And so that's what we need to do. Going to the next slide, we're going to get our child tested to identify a disability. And this is not good news or bad news. It's just information, right? We all have abilities, and some of our children have disabilities, and we want to identify what that is so that we can do the proper intervention, right? Early intervention, we know, is the best intervention. Waiting for something to just go away on its own is never really a good plan. Maybe they'll grow out of it. Maybe it's boys, maybe it's girls. And you want to make sure that you're getting that child tested to see if they have a disability so that you know what intervention needs to happen, or if in fact there is a need for intervention and that your child is meeting those milestones. So looking at the next slide, the F stands for full and a full individualized evaluation. The great Dr. Michael Webb told me that the F stands for full and a full individualized evaluation. And so what do I mean by that? A lot of times when I get a family and they have an evaluation, they didn't get a full evaluation. They got screeners, they got consults, they got informal, and all of those pieces are great data, but we want that FIIE, full and individualized initial evaluation, to be in all areas. Let's talk about what areas those full individual evaluation would cover. Number one, we would have language. You want a speech and language evaluation to include pragmatic. Often in school districts, if there's not a suspicion of autism, we don't necessarily do an evaluation for pragmatics. And so there are many areas that you would meet eligibility for in speech and language, but you want to include pragmatic. What is pragmatic? That's that social language, that social appropriateness, appropriate social reciprocity, right? So if I come up and I say, hey, Cindy, I lost my cat, I'm crying. And then a child says, oh, here are my Legos, and goes on to the next topic. That may be a deficit in the area of pragmatic. So when you're asking for that evaluation, you want to make sure that you're asking in all areas. Two things that testing does. Testing identifies and testing eliminates. Testing identifies and testing eliminates. And we want both of those things. We have a tendency as parents to go in and say, oh, I think there's ADHD, or I think there's dyslexia. And so those evaluators might follow your lead and just test in those areas. And then you might be missing something, or missing the ability to eliminate something by not doing a full evaluation. So we're going to ask for a speech and language evaluation to include pragmatic. Next, we're going to look at medical physical. And that might be any medical needs that your kiddos have, any deficits as it relates to their physical milestones. We want to make sure that we've populated all that information. We're additionally going to look at sociological. What are those factors that might be impacting the student that don't take place in school, right? They might be impacted by Harvey. They might have been impacted by maybe grandma moved it, maybe dad was deployed, maybe brother's gone off to college. And so all of those things are not necessarily something we can test or measure at school, but they certainly have the ability to have an impact on an individual. that might include why there's a need for special education or 504. Next, we're going to look at IQ. And IQ is simply your cognition. And it's those are brain skills, right? There are 7 areas that we're going to look at. When you ask for an IQ test or a cognitive evaluation, we're going to ask for all 7 Gs. We're going to ask for an evaluation with all 7 Gs. We want to make sure that all of those brain skills, those processes that we've tested, and we want to do all 7 Gs so that we make sure that we have not missed identifying a specific learning disability. And additionally, even if there's not a specific learning disability, we want to know where there's an area of need or an area of deficit. So make sure that when you do that cognitive evaluation, that you ask for them to test in all 7 Gs. Additionally, on that evaluation, you're going to ask for adaptive behavior. That simply means how much does your child look like other students his age, right? So that could be communication, leisure, education, communication. So we're looking at those sorts of deficits or differences. We're going to ask for formal achievement. So I always say cognition, your cognitive profile is kind of like it's your file cabinet, right? It's how you're cooked. We don't change cognitive processes, right? But your achievement is kind of what I can get out of my file cabinet, right? 2 things happen in the classroom: instruction and production. And so we want to see, based on the cognitive processes and formal achievement, are they commensurate, right? Are they like percentages, or is there an unexpected difference, right? And so those are formal achievement. That's going to be in writing, reading, and math, right? And then additionally, you're going to ask for a full psychological evaluation. And so often parents are asked this question when we consider a psychological evaluation. We will say to parents, has your child been sent to the office? Has your child had any behavior referrals? And if that was the reason for having a special education plan, I would have had one. I think I spent most of the 70s in the office, right? So it doesn't mean has your child gotten in trouble, or that emotional behavioral piece. We all have emotions. We all have behaviors. If you made me talk without moving my hands, I probably wouldn't have a lot to say. It's a behavior. So it's not good behavior or bad behavior. It's just behavior. And we're looking to see if the student has a behavior that impacts his learning or the learning of others, right? So in that psychological evaluation, you could be looking at and would be looking at all areas of eligibility under that psychological area. There are 3 federal eligibilities under that: autism, emotional disturbance, and or OHI for ADHD, hyperactive ADHD, combined hyper ADHD, and attentive. And then you're also possibly going to be looking at rating scales. Depending on the age of the individual, you could be doing an actual student interview. You might be looking at counseling as a related service. That's a formal evaluation that you would ask for. A functional behavior assessment, which then might give birth to a behavior intervention plan. So we want a full formal psychological evaluation. Additionally, we're going to look in consideration for related and instructional services. I think parents often miss this. The federal code says that I have a disability and that I'm in need of specially designed instruction, special education, and or related and instructional services, right? So let's talk about what some of those are. That might be VI, vision services. That might be DHH, deaf and hard of hearing itinerant services. Those could be physical therapy. Those could be occupational therapy. They could be assistive technology and written expression, assistive technology and communication, counseling as a related service. There's a list of them, music therapy. And so we're looking at those additional services to make sure that we're mitigating the impact of the disability, right? These are to identify, is there a disability? Do we need IEP goals or a 504 plan to mitigate the impact of the disability? Our job in special education is one thing, and that is to teach an individual how strategies to self-manage their disability. We're not trying to make a disability go away, but we're trying to see if there's a need and teach them strategies to self-manage that disability. So in the next slide, we're going to see what the conclusions are, right? We're going to identify the impact of the disability. So the federal government says that we look at a child and we consider their needs based on the student's unique circumstances, right? And every student has unique circumstances. So we're going to identify the impact of the child's disability by this evaluation. Now, the evaluation takes 45 school days. In other states, it's up to 60 school days So let's think about that. 45 school days are 9 weeks. So what I tell parents is don't wait. There's no benefit in waiting. It's already going to take 25% of the school year. So you're going to go in, you're going to sign notice and consent. So how do I get that testing, Karen? It's very simple. You certainly, lots of my colleagues that will be on this training might say that you would send this very fancy formal letter with all of this federal law. There's not really a need for that. It's a very simple email that you send. Hi, my name is Cindy Smith. This is my formal request for Billy Smith to have a special education testing. Areas of suspected disability are attention and learning issues and communication. We look forward to coming in and signing notice and consent. And that's it. So the school must respond to that within 15 days. And then after that, you would go in and meet with the school professionals and sign notice and consent. The notice is that the school is giving you legal notice that you understand it's in your native language. You are providing them consent. Your consent is voluntary. You can revoke that consent at any time. However, assessments that have been completed in between that time before your revocation stand. They stay in the student's cumulative folder, so you couldn't resend those. And then the consent are the areas that you're consenting to, right? Those areas that we talked about, speech and language and IQ and all of those pieces that we talked about. So they're providing you notice and consent. Once that's signed, the 45 days start, right? So it's a timeline. So within those 45 school days, which is about 9 weeks, those multidisciplinary personnel will do all of these evaluations. And we want them to do them. We want them to take their time and complete them so that we know what we're looking at for our kiddos' needs. After that, within 30 paper days or 30 calendar days, we're going to convene an IEP meeting. In Texas, we call that an ARD meeting, which stands for Admission, Review, and Dismissal, which is a great acronym because that's what we're doing at all times in an IEP meeting. We're either admitting an individual with a disability into special education. All those years they're in special education, we're reviewing. And then when a student graduates or is in no longer need of specially designed instruction or special education, we dismiss them, right? So at that meeting, we're going to identify the impact of your student's disability. And so you're going to have one of three outcomes. When we look at the next slide, the first outcome, after looking at a child's full and individual evaluation, the committee will go over that. We'll review it with the parents. We'll have parent input. Parents are 50% of the committee. And so we work as a team to see the impact of the student's disability. So number one outcome you're going to have is in fact that your child does not have a disability that needs additional support at school. So what does that mean? That simply means that the teacher of record, giving best practices and modalities and teaching standards, will be able to provide your student equal access to the general ed curriculum. Look at the next slide, there's a second outcome. Outcome number two is that your child does have a disability that needs additional support at school under a 504 plan. So a 504 plan is simply a civil rights law. 504 plan is a civil rights law. It is not an educational plan. However, it's used at schools to make sure that students are not discriminated against based on their disability, right? And because of that civil rights protection, they're allowed to have accommodations that would give them better access to the curriculum. They might have a behavior plan and they might have an individual health care plan. Additionally, students identified with dyslexia are often served under a 504. What you should know about a 504 plan is that there are not a lot of legal requirements around it. Your student could be invited to a 504 meeting without your knowledge. Certainly we invite parents, they're an important part of that, but it's not necessarily a requirement. Under a 504 plan, we're not measuring anything. We are not measuring anything. There are no goals under a 504 plan. Simply as a provision for the student to have access to accommodations that would help them be successful at school. And so now we're going to look at the third outcome, which is usually the kiddos that I serve the most. And that is outcome number three, that your student does have a disability and it needs additional support at school called an IEP. So an IEP is an individualized education program. And it is compiled of what I call 5 pillars, and we'll go over those in a second. But it's simply a plan that says your student needs more instruction than the general ed teacher could provide solely on their own. So special education has an acronym called SDI, specially designed instruction. So if you think about that, I always related to both of my sons are athletes. And while they had great, programs at school for their athletics, we got them private coaching. And I would call that specially designed instruction, right? It's something higher than what they could get at school. And so when we look at special education, we just identified a need that needs more than the general ed teacher can provide. So let's look at what I call the 5 pillars in the next slide of developing an IEP. We're going to develop a complete individualized education program. So parents are equal stakeholders. The federal government says that we are equal stakeholders in developing, revising, and editing and reviewing an IEP program. And while a parent, these might be all foreign acronyms, we use a lot of language in special education and we kind of rattle it off. You are equal members. You have equal team membership. So when you don't understand something in any of this process, stop and ask for it to be explained. When you are provided that initial paperwork, the notice and consent, the school district is going to provide you with 2 documents: the guide to the ARD process and the procedural safeguards. And both of those are available at TEA, or certainly they can provide you them at the end of the seminar, but those are very important documents for you to read. Those are a guide to the process. And then there are your procedural rights. You have federal procedural rights to protect you and your child with a disability. So avail yourself of that. So in the next slide, I call them the 5 pillars of an IEP. So pillar number 1 is present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, a PLAF. In other parts of the country, we call it a PLOF or a PLOP. But really what this is, this big fancy long acronym, is simply saying, how does the student's disability impact him in a setting? How does the student's disability impact him in a setting? And so the present levels are going to be puffy, right? They're going to tell me how Billy's autism affects him in science and his speech impairment, right? And I call it bell to bell. And sometimes for kiddos, it's bus to bus, right? I might have a kiddo with the disability condition of autism. It's really hard for me to see in science because he loves science and is very focused on that. However, I might really see the impact of his autism in writer's workshop because he has to still himself and focus, and that might be harder for him. So a present level, when properly done, I should be able to read the present level, stand at the back of the class and go, oh, there's Billy. The present level should be precise, pristine, and prescriptive. The present level should be precise, pristine, and prescriptive, so that anybody that picked up that document would know exactly the impact of the student's disability, would know if they had a medical condition that was co-current, and would have the summary of the current FIE, full individual evaluation. And because of that, the reason that we need it pristine, precise, and prescriptive is that everything good and right in the IEP document is going to be birthed out of the present levels, right? So the present levels is going to tell me how many IEP goals is he going to need in math? What level of accommodations is he going to need additionally so that he can make gains on his IEP goals? And of course, what sort of services and support time is he going to need? So I want you guys to go back and look at your PLAF and see, like my hair, if it's puffy, right? It should be very populated and very clear. If he has 5 core classes, science, social studies, math, language arts, and reading, there should be language from each of those instructors, right? Even if he's got great attendance, he loves science, and he has a B, right? So that information needs to be in the document. That is the only way that we can properly program, right? So now let's look at pillar number 2. And pillar number 2 is how we write annual goals. And so we have annual goals in many areas. We have annual goals in academics. We have annual goals in functional. We have annual goals in behavior. We might have them in social skills, emotional behavior, counseling, anything that impacts a student at school. We might have a goal as it relates to their feeding needs. We might have goals that relates to any hygiene needs. So anything that the student needs that we need education around, that we need specially designed instruction around, that's going to mitigate the impact of their disability. Often people think of annual goals as just academic goals, right? We might have a kiddo that has ADHD And we might say, well, he doesn't need special education because he has all A's. Let's be really clear. Having good grades has nothing to do with the possibility of you having a disability and needing specially designed instruction. So we look at all of those areas. The federal and state law does not say, is there an academic need? It says, is there an educational need, right? And we're looking at three things always for a child in special education. The three federal thresholds are gainful employment, independent living, and further education. So what is it about this student's disability that will impact him? But we need to work on education to make him successful in those three areas, right? So the next thing that we're going to look at when we're looking at annual goals is we're going to make sure that they are smart, that they are, again, pristine, that we can measure them, that anybody that picks up that annual goal is working on the same thing, right? That we're working on the exact same thing to mitigate the impact of the disability. It will have criteria. We're going to measure them every grading period. And then we're also going to make sure that we have the right implementers. So who are the implementers? The implementers are the persons that are either working on the goal and or collecting data. In an IEP, we're always collecting data. Why? So that we know if it's working, if we're moving the ball down the field, if it's not working, and we change the criteria or the expectation of the learner. At the bottom of the IEP goal are going to be implementers. Those might be general ed, special education, maybe the physical therapist, any educator or service provider that's going to work on that IEP goal, again, to mitigate the impact of the student's disability. You'll receive IEP goal updates with every progress report. So you'll get your student's grade, and then you'll also get a separate document that tells you where the student is in those percentages. So when we write an annual goal, we're going to write them for 36 instructional weeks. That's a full year. Obviously, your child may not start special ed September 1st and June 1st. So if he started special education in October, then we would write the IEP goals from October to October. And so that's how we measure, that's how we implement annual goals to mitigate the impact of the student's disability. Next slide is pillar number 3. We're going to write needed accommodations. Notice I said needed. When I get a kiddo's document and they have 42 goals, I'm like, oh, that's way too many goals. That's way too many accommodations, right? So an accommodation in an IEP plan is something that we decided as a committee, without this additional layer of support, without this accommodation, we know that he's not going to make expected gains on that IEP goal. I really recommend that you never have more than 10 accommodations. Again, your accommodations are actually a civil right. And so I don't expect for teachers to stand up and give 42 accommodations before they say good morning class, right? So what are the needed accommodations that he needs to make gains on his IEP goals? A needed accommodation is something that I'm worried about. We don't educate based on fear. So I want him to have this accommodation just in case. Nope, we don't do just in case. We educate based on one word, data. So if the data says that he needs that right now, then we have the accommodation. If we think that he's going to get the accommodation in 2 years, great. We'll look at it when that comes up, but we don't put accommodations in for something that may or may not happen. Again, daily accommodations, needed accommodations would also have to line up with any state testing. All right, next is pillar number 4, and that's going to be where to implement the student's program. Pillar number 4 on the next slide is where do we implement the student's program? And where we implement the student's program is called LRE. And so the LRE is the least restrictive environment. And so Veronica, if you want to slide up to the next pillar, which is the next slide, thank you. So where do we implement the student's program? LRE, least restrictive environment. Least restrictive environment is not general education. It is not general education. The law says least restrictive environment is consideration. And it simply says this, that we educate students with disabilities to the maximum extent possible with their non-disabled peers with supports and supplementary aids. But sometimes that doesn't work. And so then we have to look at where's a more appropriate setting. So wherever the most appropriate setting for the student is their LRE. It's the least restrictive environment. Sometimes kiddos with great disabilities would be disadvantaged to stay in general ed. And so there are some kiddos that will be in special education that won't ever be in general education, but we looked at their program and their needs and we identified that that was their least restrictive environment. Additionally, the least restrictive environment is considered again, across content. It's not a one and done. Special education is a service. It's not a location. So there's not a special education room. There might be an area that you provide special education, but rooms are not special education. The services, right? So I might have a kiddo that is in life skills for a content area and also in resource and also in general ed. But we look at across content areas and where's the most appropriate place to implement those IEP goals. And then looking at the next slide, pillar number 5, we're going to look at schedule of services. Schedule of services. You know, when I work with families, they almost always want to jump to this page, that schedule of services, right? What am I getting? What are the services I'm getting? And while we do want to look at that, that is at the end. An IEP document, the ARD document builds the whole way, right? I know from looking at the present levels with probability what the schedule of services are going to look like. So the schedule of services is going to list at minimum, it depends on the software that you use, but at minimum, the special education times, right? Maybe he has special education time for math and he has special education time for language arts. The other areas he's going to be successful in gen ed. And then we delineate what kind of special education time is that, because there are a number of different programs and settings. So you might have special education that's called life skills. We're working on functional needs, life skills, and an alternate curriculum. You might have a special education setting that is an adaptive behavior unit. We're working on, working on mitigating the impact of the students' behaviors. You might have an autism program. You might have resource. You might have general ed with a co-teacher. You might have general ed with an in-class support teacher, and there's many other settings. So we're going to identify where are those support times and where do we implement. So special education service can be implemented in general ed or a special education setting. And so that's a short overview kind of the 5 pillars. We have lots of trainings that are available for you guys on Special Education Academy on the YouTube channel, so you can avail yourself of that for anybody at any time. And we have lots of content across all platforms. But our job is to help parents partner with schools. On the next slide, our job is to help parents partner with schools for the implementation of FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. So if you look on the next slide, we'll talk about what is FAPE. So FAPE is another fancy acronym that we use in special education. It's a free, appropriate public education. Well, Karen, what's a free, appropriate? Is that what's best? It is not. It's not what's best. We don't use the word best in education. We use the word appropriate, right? And sometimes parents get confused on that, what is best, because we have 3 models at all times, right? We have an educational model, we have a medical model, and we have a therapeutic model. And sometimes they are very different in their application. You might have a medical model, which indicates more services that are offered at school. Same with the therapeutic model. But when we're looking at educational model, free, appropriate public education, we're looking at what is the most appropriate delivery to help mitigate the impact of the student's disability with their unique circumstances. So for instance, your speech language pathologist that's in private might recommend that you come in for speech 4 times a week. And that's certainly something that you make a decision with your private provider. That wouldn't be an appropriate delivery model in public school. And why is that? Because when we're looking at implementing FAPE, a free, appropriate public education, we know that in special education, 2 things are always in play. It's meaningful benefit and harmful effect. Meaningful benefit and harmful effect, they're always in play, right? Because there's going to be challenges and obstacles and possible impact to the student with special education, right? We're being removed from general education, we're removed from appropriate role models, maybe the full extent of the general education curriculum, they might be a stigmatization. So when we look at a kiddo that needs speech, if I take him out and provide him speech out of the classroom, then he's missing something in the classroom, right? So we're always juggling meaningful benefit, harmful effect. And we believe that we've completed a document, an IEP document, that there will be harmful effect, but we believe the meaningful benefit will outweigh any potential harmful effects. So we look at what is appropriate, and those are based on circuit court. We're in the 5th Circuit Court here in Texas. And so you can learn about the usual protocols and deliveries of those appropriate models. But again, it's always individualized for a student's needs. If you look on the next slide, it's time to reassess your child, right? So we do reassessments, the LEA, the local education agency, the DOE, the Department of Education, or the SCA, the state education agency, has a legal requirement every triennial, every 3 years, to look at a document called a READ, a reevaluation of existing educational data. And we're looking at testing in new areas. We don't have to test an area, every area, but we do have to talk about them to see if new testing is needed. Additionally, annually, if the parent requests testing that hasn't been done, or it's been over a year, then we do that testing to provide updated levels to see if there continues to be a need for special education. And then on the next slide, it's my mission statement, and it simply says that when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody. And we do that most times, we get it right for the child. And so, special education is the documents breathing and moving, and we're always making sure that we're refining it to meet the student's disability. And then on the next slide is just our contact information. Our heart is to serve you. We do professional development for school districts all over the nation. We do training for staff members. We do training for admin. Of course, we train parents, and we train advocates to go out and advocate nationally. And so you can always reach us at admin at Special Education Academy. And we train everyone. You can go to the next slide. We train everyone that sits at the 504 IEP table, because we know there's never going to be enough training for individuals that serve students in schools. And we love school-based members and are so thankful for them to partner with us. And then you can find us. Our contact information is at the bottom. I'm sure we provided the slide deck. That's our mailing address. And then we're on all the fun platforms. We're on the TikTok and Facebook and the Instagram and the LinkedIn and all of the things. And certainly if there's ever any training that you want, we do Facebook Lives. We go live on TikTok, and we do trainings that we provide on YouTube. So if there's something specific that you would like training on, we might have a series of it already, but we certainly want to partner with you to make sure that we get your questions answered. And so I'm going to address some of these questions in the chat. And so
see the questions
Yeah.
in the chat. I think we have a question.
yeah, so it says, if you have, do you do consultations? I'm confident in my ability to advocate, but they continue to tell me that the data supports are being in co-teaching classrooms. How does a parent know that the data is supporting a certain setting? So that's a really good question. So absolutely, we do consultations. They're called records review. You provide us opening documents, we review them, and we Zoom with parents to show them what our request would be, whether it's new testing, kind of how to make sure that we're discerning the information in the present levels so that supports the setting. And so how you know what setting is appropriate is, first of all, is the setting that they're in, are they making expected gains? And if they're not making expected gains, then we adjust the delivery in that setting, and we adjust the IEP goals. We don't just go, oh, that didn't work, let's pull them out. And then we look at where's the most appropriate place to implement their IEP. And again, the data drives everything. And so I would ask for raw data that populates the IEP progress reports. And that is the data that the implementers have collected in the many weeks while they're working on those kiddos' IEP goals. And then kind of something you added, this is for future setting transition from 5th to 6th grade, right? And a lot of times schools have practices at their schools, which might be great for most kiddos, but we're always looking at one child at a time. And this might be a program or a practice that we have here at this school, but the I stands for individualized. So if that new setting is appropriate for them, then that's fantastic. But we just don't jump to the next one, because that's what we do here. We do what's appropriate for each child on an individual basis.
All right. I'm not seeing more questions. Guys, if you have more questions for Karen, please type it in the chat box on the Q&A. Try to see in the Q&A, but we already letter of intent.
Yeah,
No.
and somebody asked a question earlier about where do we advocate? So I have been sitting here with an Ethernet cord since March of 2020. So I already had clients all over the world, but we do all of our prepping and IEP meetings via Zoom or virtual. I represent families in mediations, due process, federal filings of the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. And even those due process court hearings, we do virtual. So that's one of the great blessings out of COVID is we can all meet, but be in different counties.
Yes, you are in Houston, right, Karen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes, yes,
Awesome.
yes. Where we have lots of humidity. We had a training last week and somebody flew in from New Jersey and she texted me, she goes, the inside of my mask is wet. I was like, yes, the Gulf Coast. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all your knowledge and information that guys, we are going to send the PDF that Karen provide with all this information about 504 and IEP. And we will send a letter today in an email. So thank you so much, Karen, for being with us. And
Thank y'all.
thank you. So Karen, we are going to stop. Well, we are going to share another youth video. That's what we're going to do. And then we are going to have a little break. And then we are going to be back at 11:45. We have another vendor from our community. We have Rocio Moreno for Blue Cross Blue Shield talking about the Star Kids program to us. That's coming at 11:45. But now we are going to share a video of a youth with a disability. So I hope Alejandra can help us with the technology. And now this time we can hear the video. Ale, we are seeing your file documents. You're sharing that.
Okay, let me try it again. Hopefully try to will work. One second.
Why you never finish your culinary arts course?
Good.
With culinary arts, I just needed the capstone, which you have to go to a restaurant and test out like your skills. So I passed everything else except the carrying the food. So I have a physical disability, is that my hands, that's all they turn. So I can't get the plates, it's hard to get the plates, and also I can't, like when I go to the drive-thru, the change falls out because I can't really close my hand when they're sideways. It's on both arms. It's called a radial ulnar synostosis of both arms. And for criminal justice, I couldn't also finish the capstone, the physical test, because you have to do push-ups and sit-ups, and I can't really turn my hands to actually do that. And for the small business administration, I passed algebra, but I passed the other elementary algebra.
How did you create this website, Autism Hero?
So I created the business. First, why did I create a business? I should say that first. So the reason is I went to apply after high school to many places, and they wouldn't give me a job. And then when I went to college, I tried to apply again, and they said that I was overeducated, I don't know how you say that word. So they didn't want to give me the job, not even to be a dishwasher or stuff like that. So I decided to create my own business. I started with a fashion jewelry at a local flea market, and with my mom's help also. And then I started selling autism. I was like, well, we need more autism awareness in the valley and around the community. So I started Autism Hero TX, which is for Texas. The logo, I did everything. And little by little, I started buying mugs. I started with pens first, and I sold those pens for $12 each. And then I put in mugs and lanyards and started looking everywhere for more stuff. And that's how I think it's 60 something. Like 4 years later, I had 2 tables full of stuff. But then we had the 2018 flood, and I lost most of the merchandise in that flood.
Can you show us some of the material that
Yes.
you're selling right now?
Yes. I have silicone bracelets, which everyone has seen these, and I have these other ones that are real nice. They have
Those are the autism symbol right there, right?
yes,
Okay.
and then I also sell bandanas. I have in packages so they don't get dirty. And we have lanyards. We have pink lanyards. We have puzzle
Oh.
lanyards.
Okay.
We have pins. We also have sterling silver keychains, sunglasses with autism print, and we have a lot of stuff.
And how do you sell these? Do you have you posted on Facebook, or people can contact you through your website, or how the people contact you?
I have a Facebook page, and you could also contact me through my personal page, where I post everything.
Okay, under Jose Lopez. Under if I look up for you on Facebook, how do I look up for you?
Autism Hero Texas.
Autism
Or
Hero
TX.
Texas. TX.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jose. Thank you for your time. Can you show us the mug?
Okay, that's all the video. I will go ahead and link his Facebook page on here so that you can check out everything else that he's selling. And if you want to support him, feel free to do so. And thank you very much. And I believe we're going to go ahead and take a quick break right now. And then hopefully by 11:45, we will have you back for the next presentation of our exhibitor. Correct, Veronica?
Yes, in the next thing in our agenda, 11:45, we have Rocio Moreno talking about Blue Cross Blue Shield STAR program, I think it's called. Yeah, the STAR Kids Blue Cross Blue Shield. That's coming at 11:45. And then at 12, we are going to hear our next speaker is Dustin Rinders with Texas Disability Rights Texas. And he's going to start talking at noon at 12. So this is just going to be a break. Go to the restroom, you need to eat, anything like that. And we're going to be back 11:45. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for being with us today, guys. And now we have our next speaker, Dustin Rinders from Disability Rights Texas. He's going to be talking about identifying and conquering current civil rights challenges in Texas special education. And Dustin is an attorney who supervised the statewide education work of Disability Rights Texas, and he has a lot of experience. He's been working over 16 years in this field, and he's going to be talking to us about all special education. So welcome, Dustin, and thank you for being here.
Hi, I'm happy to be with y'all. I've been with PRN many times for different presentations. So I was trying to think of something today to make this a little different for those of you who have heard other maybe more basic special education overviews from myself or one of my colleagues here at Disability Rights Texas or one of our partner organizations. I'm happy to be with PRN. Y'all are great getting out the words for your trainings. Today, I'm going to talk about identifying and conquering current civil rights challenges in Texas special education. And so I really want to just go issue to issue for some top issues that I think are affecting our state, either in that they've been issues that we've been talking about for a number of years, and I want to give important updates on where we stand now, or in some cases, just some brief updates on newer issues that are facing students in our state. I want to start by making sure that people are aware of Disability Rights Texas. And so I'm going to play y'all a quick video, and I think I've optimized this so you'll be able to hear it. And this will just tell you a little bit more about the organization that I'm representing here today.
All people deserve basic human rights. That's why Congress created a system of protection and advocacy agencies, also known as P&As, to protect and advocate for the rights of people with disabilities, because in the past, they have not been treated equally. For most of the 20th century, the phrase "out of sight, out of mind" was more than just a popular saying. It was the means for dealing with an unwanted segment of the population. People with disabilities were either segregated from society, locked away in institutions, or remained isolated at home with absolutely no services, not even an education. They were abused, neglected, and forgotten. Then, in 1973, ABC news cameras exposed the filthy living conditions and poor treatment inside Staten Island's Willowbrook School, which housed people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. It shocked the nation.
The doctor had warned me that it would be bad. It was horrible.
Finally, in 1975, Congress acted. They mandated that every U.S. state and territory have an official protection and advocacy agency. P&As go by many names, but their mission is the same: to protect and advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. Together, the P&As form the National Disability Rights Network, taking on issues affecting people with all kinds of disabilities. No other organizations have the sweeping access authority that P&As have. They go anywhere services for people with disabilities are provided, from schools to hospitals to prisons and jails, to monitor conditions and listen to concerns. They make sure people with disabilities are treated equally, with dignity and respect, and never have to face the same kind of mistreatment they saw at Willowbrook. P&As ask the public for input on which issues to take on in their communities. P&As can fight against abuse and neglect in residential services, to end exploitation at work, for fair treatment in the criminal justice system, for equal access to public education and voting, for accessible communities and services and assistive technologies, and countless other issues. That's the protection and advocacy system. Disability Rights Texas is the protection and advocacy agency for people with disabilities in Texas. Visit www.drtx.org for more information or call.
Okay, so that was a little bit of information about our organization. And now I want to just switch and start talking about some of the issues that I wanted to raise with you today. And so, you know what? I've been at Disability Rights Texas for near 17 years. In the time that I've been working on education issues here, I would say about half of the requests for assistance we get around the state are in some ways related to the approach to student behavior for students with disabilities. And so that ranges from concerns about restraint and seclusion, suspension, expulsion, more restrictive placement, adequacy of positive behavior supports, inappropriate referrals to law enforcement or the criminal justice system, or even the way police are sometimes involved to take people in crisis mental health situations to the hospital. And so I want to talk about some of those particular issues now, and kind of systemically what we're seeing. So in particular, I want to highlight, here at Disability Rights Texas, we had spent a long time and have always and continue to advocate for children in our meetings to receive positive behavior supports and preventative services. We argue against inappropriate discipline. But in recent years, it's become clear that we really need to do more to tackle the inappropriate criminalization of children in school for disability-related conduct and the way police are inappropriately involved in so many school situations, whether it's for minor behavior or whether it's for mental health crisis. And so I want to show a video now of a DRTX client and one of my colleagues who's an attorney here, kind of highlighting what that kind of misuse of law enforcement and inappropriate response by law enforcement can do.
Luther, I need you to get up and walk. I got the phone call. They said, Miss Turner, something is not right with Luther. I said, okay, I'll be there. By the time I got to the school, when I saw my son, he was sitting on the floor in the classroom.
Please listen. Ow!
Luther's the type of child that if someone is doing him wrong and he comes to you and tell you, he feel like immediately you're supposed to handle that. So on that particular day, when the kid disturbed him and he tried to tell, they ignored the situation. So Luther started running behind the kid to defend himself. But then in the end of it, Luther got in trouble for trying to defend himself. Upon the arrival of the police officer, instead of them assessing the situation, they just took it in their hands and put my son in handcuffs when he was not violently attacking anyone. And then he was dragged out of the school forcibly without having an opportunity to explain himself or the situation at hand. He didn't have an opportunity to put his clothes back on that was falling off of him, which was not acceptable to me as a mother. I don't see that you were helping me when you were violently dragging my son out of the school until after they got him into the police car, and he still didn't quite understand. And he was like, I want to be with my mommy and things like that. And I say, Luther, at this moment, you know, unfortunately you can't be with me. I have to have them to transport you to the hospital.
My ribs are so bad.
My name is Carmel Willis, and I'm an attorney with Disability Rights Texas. I assist families in getting the appropriate education and behavior supports for their children within the school system. I'm so sorry.
I get emotional when it's played back to me in my mind and trying to address the situation at hand. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to get emotional on you, but he's totally different.
I met Ms. Turner through her concerns regarding the services her son was receiving. She felt like he was being isolated in an area, for children who were having behavior issues and not being integrated in the general education community in the school.
He has mood disorders. So he not only has special needs, Luther is a child that has sleep apnea. Luther is a child that have a lot of allergy issues. Luther is a child that has ADHD. Luther is a child that has special needs.
In this particular campaign, Counselors Not Cops campaign is crucial for children like Luther. Over-policing that happens many times in our school systems, especially with children of color and children with disabilities, makes them feel less safe and less supported in many of our schools.
So it's not for an officer to come and manhandle a child of no age. It's not acceptable and should not be acceptable.
If there's anyone watching who needs help with their child and getting the appropriate services for their child within the school system, we definitely want you to also contact Disability Rights Texas. We ask that you contact us at 1-800-315-3876, or you can go to our website to get more information about how to request our services.
More parents need to get together and fight for the rights of making the school system put more counselors in the school for these children.
So one reason that I wanted to highlight Luther's case and my colleague Carmel's words is because we haven't seen the kind of progress on Counselors Not Cops campaigns in Texas that we've seen in the rest of the nation. And so large school districts, over 30 large school districts across the country, including almost all the big cities in the country except Texas cities, the school districts have really made a priority of reallocating some portion of school policing budgets towards increasing mental health supports in schools. We haven't seen a single Texas school district do the same. We've seen some increase for access to counseling in Texas schools, which is a welcome change. But the reality is it's not enough to only increase the mental health supports available to students. We have to stop over policing in schools if we want to keep children like Luther safe in our schools. And so one thing that I want to just share with y'all is that there is no research or evidence that police presence in schools increases or improves school safety. And on the contrary, police presence increases the number of minor behavioral problems that are referred to the police. And these referrals unnecessarily funnel kids into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. And police are misused in disciplinary matters and unnecessarily relied on in crisis mental health situations that can be taken without police. The officers who were called in Luther's case, there was a specific request for mental health trained officers. And yet I think we can see from the video that it's not the response that any of us would want for one of our children in a mental health crisis. Another very, very important issue that I want to raise today, and is restraint and seclusion. This is a very difficult issue in the state of Texas. Disability Rights Texas put out a report on December 7th of 2020 on the use of restraint in Texas schools. And we looked at the data around the state and found that a shocking 91% of restraints in Texas public schools are all students with disabilities, even though only 9.8% of the state's school population qualified for special education. Additionally, African-American or Black students make up only 12.6% of the state's student population, but a shocking 26.1% of the total restraints. In some districts, that disproportionality is even worse. Texas was an early state to adopt restraint restrictions and training requirements, and to have a ban on locked seclusion of students. For years, we were proud of that and still are to some degree. However, what has happened over time is other states have gone further and further, and Texas hasn't made progress. So while we do require 24-hour notice to parents if their child is restrained with details about the incident and what was done to try to prevent it from happening and who was involved in it. And while we require a core team of people on every campus to be trained in proper restraint techniques and how to try to prevent restraint from being necessary, we actually don't require all educators who may end up restraining kids to be trained beforehand. And the Texas law specifically allows an educator who restrains a child who hadn't been previously trained to just get trained in the month after the restraint occurred. Texas is really an outlier there. Most districts are really requiring at least core staff in areas like special education to all receive training in restraint. The reason we're doing that is done is because when restraint goes poorly, the consequences can be truly deadly. So this is a picture of Xavier Hernandez, who is a young adult student in Fort Worth ISD, who died just last year after a restraint at the Boulevard Oaks Special Education campus. Only weeks after Xavier's death, a video caught another student at his same school being restrained in a floor or supine position with multiple staff over the top of them. Most deaths involved in restraint across settings, whether they be in hospitals or residential treatment centers or school settings, occur in prone or supine positions. There's not a clear ban on prone and supine restraint in the state of Texas. There may be instances I think we can all recognize where a child may be on the ground and in danger of injuring themselves. But all reputable training programs require that you move the person from the more restrictive setting to a less restrictive setting. And no reputable program would ever teach a takedown where you take a child from a sitting or standing position into a lying position. But in DRTX's experience, in doing the monitoring activities that you learned about in the video I played at the beginning of this presentation, we routinely review videos of restraints where school staff are inappropriately doing takedowns, taking children from sitting or standing positions into floor, prone, or supine positions, which puts them at great risk of not only trauma responses, but potentially of having their airways blocked and in the worst case scenarios, losing their life. So these issues are really issues of life and death. And there are additional things we can do in Texas to address not only inappropriate restraint that may be just neglectful, but also actual abuse that's occurring in public schools. There's been a real increase in news stories, prosecutions of actual staff on student abuse in public schools. And so DRTX has been working with some of our partners in advance of this next legislative session to open up a real conversation on ways to address abuse in public schools, because we know it impacts children with disabilities disproportionately. We believe that it's necessary to require schools to notify parents of the cameras in the classroom law and to require cameras in high-risk self-contained behavioral campuses without a request. You know, Texas was the first state, again, an area where we were an early leader, to allow parents to request a camera be installed in a special education classroom that allows the parent to access that footage if there is a major incident involving their child. Unfortunately, what we're finding is that only parents like y'all who are able to do things like attend this session know that they can do that. And so in many really high risk places, self-contained behavioral campuses, for example, where restraints are everyday occurrences, there often are not cameras operating in most classrooms. You know, the cameras matter because what we see is that they offer an opportunity to show that staff who did no wrong were acting appropriately. When a restraint occurs, they offer learning opportunities to see what went well, what could be done differently in the future to keep students safe. And in the somewhat rare, but unfortunately more increasingly common situation where there are allegations of actual abuse, in many but not all cases, the cameras can really show what happened to know if the abuse likely occurred or did not. We also believe that there are some needs to require schools to keep the footage on file for longer periods of time and to ease restrictions and challenges that some parents are facing when trying to access the recordings from schools, such as having to provide a specific date and time and specific reason. There's also a couple legislative sessions ago, there was concern about educators who had sexually abused students being allowed to resign from jobs and then get jobs in other school districts. And so Texas created the Do Not Hire Registry to allow schools to search that registry before hiring staff. We here at Disability Rights Texas have seen cases of staff who were fired for illegal, improper restraints that rose to the level of abuse, even cases where there had been a CPS finding of a likelihood of abuse occurring, where the educator has still gone on to get a job at another Texas public school. So for that reason, we want to have a conversation about whether the Texas Do Not Hire Registry should be expanded to not only include sexual abuse, but also include abuse of students with disabilities, including physical abuse and improper restraint. We also want to look at closing loopholes that shield school staff from criminal responsibility from assault, abuse, and excessive use of force and maltreatment of students with disabilities. So, a lot of times we end up talking about the things we don't want to see, right? We don't want to see abuse. We don't want to see floor restraint, improper responses. This is a resource. If any of you are inclined, I know many of you may come here today just looking for tools to advocate for your individual child in an ARD meeting, and that's wonderful. But I also encourage some of you to consider being a part of the larger conversations, whether it be in your school district or at the legislature, impacting the way schools respond to mental health and disability more globally. Here's some key and tools for how schools and others should respond to mental health crisis. And this is from the federal agency that oversees mental health, SAMHSA. And so the first goal should be to avoid harm, allow watchful waiting. And so when you think of that video that Luther was involved in, the whole reason he's drugged through the hallway is that the police just weren't patient enough to let him get up. He refused a command to stand up, and so they end up dragging him through a long hallway. Obviously, they should have just waited longer. When urgent, you should minimize the duration and the negative impact of an intervention. You should try to intervene in person-centered ways. You should operate with a sense of shared responsibility. Intervention should be done with an individual instead of to them. When individuals are done to a person, they instead increase that person's feelings of helplessness in some cases. We should address trauma. We have clients who, young women who have histories of abuse, who do not want to be restrained by men. And yet when we ask that only women be involved in any restraint for that student, sometimes schools have trouble with that request, but it's clearly would be re-traumatizing for them to not honor that request. We need to establish feelings of personal safety in responding to crisis, base our response on the person's strengths, look at the whole person. We need to view that person as a credible source of information about their experience. And we need to recognize recovery resilience and natural supports that people have, and operate to always put in place more prevention for future crisis. So the whole time I've worked at Disability Rights Texas, I've been trying to combat the discriminatory suspension and expulsion of students with disabilities. In our state, it has always been the case since I've been here that students with disabilities are about twice as represented in all forms of exclusionary discipline and removal, suspension, expulsion, disciplinary alternative school or DAP placement. All of that, students with disabilities are about twice as represented. And in some individual school districts, it's as bad as 4 to 5 times as represented as non-disabled peers. Additionally, when we look at African-American or Black students with disabilities, we see that the number is even greater. And to a smaller degree, Latino students are also overrepresented in discipline compared to white peers. So the main resource that I want to introduce you all to is we have on the DRTX website what's called our interactive discipline guide. And so this is the link to this guide, and I will share my PowerPoint with any of you who like. I'm happy to send it to PRN, and they can post it anywhere they have for those of you who are attending. This guide, and you can also easily find it by just doing a Google search for DRTX Interactive Discipline Guide. When we say interactive, this isn't a handout. It's actually on our website where you answer questions and it gives you advice based on your answers to the questions. So it starts out and it says, is your child being removed for less than 10 days or over 10 days? Is your child in special education or 504 or not yet? And based on the answers to your questions, it keeps asking questions and giving you tips and advice. And you can click on any term you're not familiar with and get more information about it. It's a really good resource. I think, a lot of times we know a discipline incident. I'm the parent of a child with a disability who struggles with behavior and discipline. And so we all know that you can be having a normal day and then you come home and realize that your child had a really rough day at school that day, and you're all of a sudden trying to figure it out. And in the past, people might think, well, we need to try to do an intake, and then it's going to take a week to hear back from a place like Disability Rights Texas. This allows you 24/7, 7 days a week to get information on how to navigate any disciplinary situation for your son or daughter. So please use this resource and share it with others who you know who might be able to use it. So I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. We've been talking about behavior and discipline and response to mental health crisis. I want to talk about another issue that I see as a civil rights issue in schools, and that's reading as a civil right. So the ACLU and some other states filed these really interesting lawsuits about the right to read that they identified. And, it really got me thinking, because so often in my work, we're trying to put out fires on discipline or removal or other issues, but we know that literacy is one of the key indicators of who is going to end up in the criminal justice system and who isn't. And reading really should be a civil right. And in Texas, we have this very long-standing, confusing system of how to serve students with dyslexia in particular, which is, of course, the most common disability that causes challenges with reading. And so I want to talk a little bit here about the Texas failure to identify and serve students with dyslexia in special education as a part of this theme on the civil right to read. So first, I want to talk about who is eligible for special education. And so to be eligible for special education, you have to have a disability, and dyslexia is a specific learning disability. And you also have to have an educational need for specially designed instruction. And if you have those two things, well, then you're eligible for special education. A lot of you may be familiar that in recent years in Texas, students with dyslexia around the state have primarily been served on 504 plans, and a very small percentage are evaluated and offered special education. So what's the difference in eligibility for the ADA and 504 and eligibility for special education? So we just talked about special education, so you have to have a disability and an educational need, and that's represented by this smaller circle here in the diagram. And all of those students in special education are also protected by two other laws, the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Because the ADA and 504 really protect all people with disabilities. And so 504 protects all students with disabilities, regardless of whether you have an educational need for special education or not. 504 and the ADA are largely non-discrimination statutes. So why is dyslexia so confusing in Texas about whether you get special education or not? Well, Texas appeared in many ways to be an early leader. In 1985, our state was the first state to pass its own dyslexia law, providing for screening and treating of dyslexia. And advocates at the time who were responsible for that change were really concerned about children with mild to moderate dyslexia who were in regular education classrooms without any support or remediation, and were falling behind because they didn't get the early intervention that they needed. So the goal was to screen everyone to help find some of these people who would later struggle and get them some services. So a really noble goal. The result, though, ended up being this separate system for dyslexia that developed outside of special education and even 504 for many years. And when concerns about services arose, there was no easy avenue for a complaint because the students weren't part of 504 or special education that have complaint remedies. Additionally, another strange byproduct of our separate system is that many special educators in Texas didn't learn about dyslexia or even really the research on teaching people to read because they just didn't see it as a part of special education based on the way the Texas system was operating. And so I'm going to pause here and talk a little more about this. So in Texas, what happened is we had this crisis on students with disabilities not being identified for special ed. Some of you may remember that TEA had a cap in place for 14 years that denied special education to about 400,000 Texas students. And when that finally came out about 4 or 5 years ago in the Houston Chronicle and began a big conversation and oversight by the federal government about the way Texas operates its special ed system, people in the dyslexia community who had had trouble getting what they needed started to speak up about the specific issues of students with dyslexia being denied special education. When they did that, there were some other people who were concerned because they had always thought that maybe it was a good thing that their children were just in 504 instead of being in special education. So I want to take a minute and talk about why does identification for special education matter? Why? And Child Find is just that right to be identified and served in special education. So why does that matter? What does special education provide beyond 504 accommodations? So first and foremost, special education provides full and individualized assessment. You know, when I mentioned earlier the Texas dyslexia law, that just provides a real basic screen to see if someone may have dyslexia. It's not anything like an FIE that is a multidisciplinary team that has to assess in all areas of specific of potential disability and do a comprehensive assessment. Another change, another difference is that in 504, you basically get accommodations, but you don't have individualized education services based on personalized goals. You don't, and so for students who are working on all the same goals as all the general education peers, both academically and behaviorally, there may not be a need for that. But if you have a student who really needs to focus in on their reading skills, they very likely need to have some personalized goals in the area of reading. And so it wouldn't make sense for them not to be offered that, which would require special education generally. Additionally, special education offers far more robust legal protections and options for resolving disputes. So the thing about this option is most of us hope that we'll never need to exercise our legal protections and options for resolving disputes. We hope that our children will do well in public school, that they won't have any kind of problems that rise to the level of us wanting to contact an advocate or an attorney or file a complaint or, God forbid, file litigation. But the reality is this becomes very important when trouble starts. So if you do become concerned that your child's not making progress or they're being inappropriately disciplined, or if something else happens that gives you a major concern about your child's education, then all of a sudden these additional legal protections and options for resolving disputes that special education provide mean a whole lot. So a story that I've heard from many parents of children with dyslexia is that at first they liked the idea that their child was only going to be in 504 instead of special education because they thought, you know, maybe it's less stigma. I like the idea that they're still going to be challenged more perhaps. But then what happened is they thought their child was doing okay for a period of time. But as they got older and the curriculum became more difficult, they started to realize that their child wasn't being helped with their reading as much as they thought, was falling more behind, became increasingly frustrated, was having more behavioral challenges. And then all of a sudden they've got a dispute on their hand. They contact an advocate or an attorney, or they learn about their rights, and they realize that their options for resolving that dispute are really limited because they haven't gone the route of special education. So an additional change that is just a difference about special education compared to 504 is that special education offers transition services to prepare students 14 and over for life after high school. And so that includes a specific plan to provide services related to things like vocation and independent living. And that doesn't exist in 504. Additionally, the discipline protections in special education are similar, but stronger and more enforceable in 504. You know, we could spend a whole hour just talking about behavior and discipline easily. We could spend a lot longer than that, but just suffice it to say that the protections are somewhat stronger and more easily enforceable in special education than 504. And finally, in special education, we decide promotion to the next grade and graduation and it doesn't have in an ARD committee, and that doesn't have to be based on standardized assessment. So even though everyone takes the standardized assessment, if you're a student who's not able to pass several STAR tests, you can still progress to the next grade and ultimately graduate if you're in special education. It's not a great volume of students, but every year about this time, I end up being contacted by a high school senior who's made it all the way to their senior year, usually with pretty good grades, but still can't pass several STAR exams. And they've never been identified for needing special education. They've worked hard, they've been accommodated through 504, but they fail several STAR exams and have trouble graduating. There are some options if you just can't pass maybe one, STAR exam. There are certain committees and options schools have to still give a diploma, but they're limited. And if you're not able to pass several of the exams, you're really limited, and that is an advantage to being in special education because you don't have that same limitation. So I talked a little earlier about that 8.5% cap that Texas Education Agency put in place for 14 years on the percentage of students that could be in special education. And this is just a graph showing that. So over that period of time, the cap was involved, the percentage of students receiving special education in our state went from about 14% all the way down, went from about 12% in Texas, 14% in the nation. And then here in Texas, dipped all the way down to 8.5%, right where the Texas Education Agency wanted it to save money. Fortunately, those laws have not been in place because Disability Rights Texas and our partners worked with federal agencies and investigative journalists. I was pleased to happen to be the person who leaked this story to the Houston Chronicle and worked with them in their amazing story, Denied, that told the story of what Texas was doing and helped turn that narrative around. And so as a result, where we are in this big failure to identify students with all disabilities, including dyslexia, is that schools are now less reluctant in the last few years to evaluate and qualify a student at parent request. But schools are still really uneven about themselves suggesting identification for struggling students. And so many families still have to be the ones to make that referral. A lot of families are still confused about the differences between special education and 504, and students with dyslexia are still rarely being offered that full and individual evaluation, and most students with dyslexia in Texas are still just in 504 instead of special education. Many schools and families remained really confused about where students with dyslexia should be served, and that's because the Texas Education Agency has been so unclear about it. So currently, in our overall rates, we have gotten up to about 10% of Texas students now qualify for special education. So that's up from the 8.5%. But as we know, that national average is 14%, which means we still have tens of thousands of students in Texas public schools who need special education but aren't receiving it. That being said, we're making progress. There is about a 13% a year increase in evaluations since the cap has been lifted. So where are we now in the state giving better guidance to schools on dyslexia? There was recently a dyslexia handbook update, and it makes it much more clear that schools should be willing to offer a full and individual evaluation for special education to students whose parents want it. It makes clear, consistent with the Department of Education expectation, that students could have an educational need for special education, though primarily receiving instruction that's outlined in the handbook. So the thing on dyslexia is a lot of kids have been always going over to maybe a CULT or other kind of reading specialist to receive dyslexia intervention services. And a lot of times those professionals teaching those classes were not special education certified. And so one of the questions became, if students with dyslexia in Texas started receiving special education, would they have to go to a resource room with a certified special ed teacher, even though the resource teacher may not know how to deliver dyslexia instruction, and there's this other person who does? And the answer is that no, you could receive special education, still get the dyslexia services that are offered by the reading specialist, but you would have some kind of special educator involved in progress monitoring, for example. And so this is the latest information from the Dyslexia Handbook, in particular, the useful Q&As. I think number 10 is probably the most useful. So if anyone on this call is themselves or helping someone advocate for a student with dyslexia whose parents want them to receive special ed services, I think this gives you the argument that you need. Well, even if they're in that dyslexia program, we still need someone in special ed to help with our goals and our progress monitoring. And so that's what you would argue for. So some practical tips. If a school offers an FIE or full individual evaluation for special ed, we encourage parents to consent and get that detailed assessment. If the school hasn't offered consent for a full individual evaluation, a parent should submit a written request as soon as possible, if even a part of that parent believes that the student may need special education. If a parent disagrees with an evaluation, they should request an independent educational evaluation. That's a second opinion by a qualified evaluator of the parent's choice at the school's expense. It's a very powerful right that parents have in all sorts of situations, including this one. Additionally, if parents are reluctant to choose the route of getting a special ed evaluation and are still in 504, they need to monitor progress really closely to make sure that their child is receiving the help and reading that they need and not just being accommodated out of needing to read. Because if at any point they become concerned about the child not making enough progress or the services the child receives, they would be better served to have that dispute in most cases in special education. So I want to talk about a little bit of a non-traditional issue that's come up in Texas. You know, everything that impacts public schools impacts students with disabilities who attend them. And a lot of times, most of us as parents may be most familiar with the disability that our child has, right? And so I've mentioned earlier that I'm the parent of a child with emotional and behavioral disabilities. And so that's the experience that I come with in addition to my professional experience of what I learn about. Here at Disability Rights Texas, we've noticed that across our program areas, whether we're monitoring facilities and mental health hospitals, or whether we're trying to help parents navigate public schools, we end up representing children with disability who are also transgender, who have, in many cases, gender dysphoria. So gender dysphoria is a mental health condition where you're uncomfortable about your gender identity. Not all transgender individuals are uncomfortable being transgender, and so some of them may not have gender dysphoria, but there is a huge overlap between transgender status and people with disabilities. And so in part, I wanted to include this slide to just kind of educate us in the disability community, anyone who may be less familiar with this, that trans rights are really disability rights in many ways. 39% of transgender adults self-identify as having one or more disabilities, and that's compared to only 15% of the general population. And a full 59.3% of transgender adolescents have long-term mental health needs. There's even additional statistics I didn't include in the slide that, for example, of how common non-traditional gender expression is among people with autism, for example. Additionally, many transgender children are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and that diagnosis alone entitles those children to protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, as well as under gender discrimination laws. So right now, one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this issue briefly in our conversation today is, I'm sure you've all heard in the media, there's been a lot of controversy with some politicians in Texas, including the governor, really wanting to target transgender students with really misleading claims. There's a claim that transgender children who receive gender affirming care, and by the way, that usually is just counseling services and beginning to socially transition. So they wear the clothing and use the name of the gender that they identify with. But in later puberty can also include puberty blockers, which are just a medication that are completely reversible. But there is an effort by our state to investigate parents who are providing or helping their children access medically necessary gender affirming care. And, you know, I think that all of us parents of children with disabilities are aware of how unfamiliar others in the general population are of the special challenges we have parenting children with disabilities, trying to access the services they need, trying to trust the experts on things, mental health and other issues that many of us maybe didn't grow up knowing about or hadn't needed to know about until we had our children. So I provide you this information today just to help you welcome these families into our disability community and know that these efforts to target transgender children are really efforts to target, in many ways, children with disabilities. And, I want everyone out there to know that Disability Rights Texas is a safe place for parents of transgender children to come and not fear any kind of report to CPS or elsewhere, and to know that we will advocate for appropriate treatment of students with disabilities who are also trans, even though they may not be politically popular at this moment. So I want to take a minute and just share additional resources that we have on the Disability Rights Texas website. So we've talked about a lot of different things today, and there are so many handouts and videos and resources at drtx.org. I want to highlight just a few of them for you. We have a handout just on how to request an initial evaluation for special ed. It lays out the timelines, and it also provides a sample letter. For anyone, especially in the dyslexia community, who's really thinking about the pros and cons or, thoughts that they have around whether to consent to a special ed evaluation or whether to request it, we have the second handout on consenting to a special ed evaluation and services that just really lays out the considerations and different things for parents to think about in making that decision. For anyone who's out there kind of still worried about the compensatory services for things that happened in the pandemic, we have a letter generator that I'm super proud of, because this was our first time to attempt to not only provide a sample document, but to actually provide a form that parents answer some questions, and it automatically generates a TEA complaint. So we're super proud of that and hope that more and more parents use it. We also have, and many of you may be familiar with this, our long form big IDEA manual. It's almost 90 pages. It's not meant to read from cover to cover, but to just look up a topic that you need to learn more about. And it really is fairly comprehensive. It has over 20 different sample letters to do everything from request an ARD, to request your records, to request an evaluation, to request an independent evaluation. And so there's many tools in that manual, and we hope that you use it. I'm also want to thank our friends in Houston at Salt and Light, which is a Mandarin speaking parent support organization, for providing a Mandarin translation of the IDEA manual for the first time. So in case any of you know people who need access to this manual in other languages, it is now available in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin on the DRTX website. On the evaluation issue, some people get confused about response to intervention and how that overlaps with evaluation. We have a great infographic to make that clear. And then, of course, I've already mentioned the DRTX Interactive Discipline Guide. And so just one last shout out for that resource. So with that, I want to pause, and we still have about 10 minutes. And so I've intentionally allocated some time for questions. I do see here that we have at least one question in the chat of why do students with disabilities under UIL and are required to have a school average above 70 in order to attend concerts, field trips, sporting competitions, and activities for their average. So that is a UIL requirement and presents a difficulty. The way I tend to suggest most families approach this is to approach it in the school ARD committee meeting or 504 committee meeting to get the appropriate supports and accommodations in place that allow the student to perform at a 70 or better average. And so to me, if you have a student, and this is what becomes so silly, is it's very much a general education standard, right? Like we know that for students in special education, the primary way of monitoring progress is the special education progress reports you should be receiving on your IEP goals. However, some students in special education still have courses where they're just on the general curriculum and don't have individualized goals. And so on those topics or in those courses, grades may still be a primary way of monitoring progress. But even if you're had an all modified curriculum, you're still going to be giving grades. And I do think that if you are receiving grades under 70, that it's suggestive that the accommodations and supports in place are inadequate. And so I would call an IEP or 504 meeting to discuss what additional supports or accommodations do we need to be putting in place. My child is making failing grades, which suggests to me that the accommodations and supports are inadequate. And that's the way that I would address that issue. Do we have any, please do use this next 8 minutes. I am happy not only to answer any questions that I've covered in this presentation, but I am an open book for you to ask any special education or school disability related question that may be on your mind.
Justin, we have some in the chat. If you open the chat, we have one.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was in the Q&A. So
Manuel Ricardo, if you can see that one, that's
sure.
Or Manuel, what happened months before cops were called?
So that was in Luther's case. And so, I mean, this was a student that the parent was trying to get better behavioral supports for. And so in those months before, not unlike other kids, the parents had some concerns. But the truth was that it really was that particular incident that the parent and how it was handled was so concerned about. So Mrs. Rosales says, my son has a rude teacher and I report a lot of times and the school and district don't do anything. He's a math teacher and all the time he speaks about other races needs dead or says bad words to students. One day on the son's telephone, they called her and could hear that he had spoken bad words about another race. And he didn't say your mom, and all time the school said he's the only teacher they have and my son needs to behave. So that's it's a really good question. I mean, first, I just want to take a minute and say how horrified I am that an individual would use language like that around impressionable students, really anywhere, but that kind of person would be in a school building. So there's a couple options here. One, this is an example of something that isn't special ed or disability specific. It's about inappropriate conduct of school personnel. So one option you have is to use your district's grievance process. And you can, in your school's handbook, look up, or on their website, look up their grievance process and file a grievance. And it's made to be a parent-friendly process where you don't need anyone to be involved. The main challenge is that the grievance process often has tight timelines. But I would encourage a grievance on this because sometimes, even though on personnel issues of how a school district treats an employee, they may not be able to tell the parent all they're doing. If you file a grievance, very often this type of incident is going to make it into the employer's file. It could change their performance evaluations or their future contracts. Additionally, Depending on what kind of evidence we had of this, or if it was repeated, you could even consider taking the larger action of filing an ethics complaint with the Texas Education Certification Board, which oversees teacher certifications. And so you can look online and see if this teacher's name is listed as a certified teacher, and you could file a complaint where the teacher would at least have to answer for this allegation. You know, the truth is, a lot of times in these situations, the teacher is going to deny they said what they said, and it may be a he said versus she said, but it's a very serious thing to have an ethics complaint. So I never want parents to file ethics complaints against teachers or anyone else if it's just an honest disagreement. But if there's something that really gets to the core of this being a person who doesn't belong in the classroom and doesn't belong around children, and I would say that explicit racism definitely falls in that category, that you can't be an appropriate teacher if you're saying racist things to students, then I do think it would be fair to file an education certification complaint against that educator. Another thing is, I'm not sure in this case if the racial group that the teacher is targeting is the same racial group as Ms. Rosales' child. But if that was the case, I also think that Ms. Rosales and her son would have a racial discrimination complaint that they could make to the Office of Civil Rights, because certainly being a person of a particular race, having to sit in a classroom with a teacher speaking ill of you and your family is unconscionable, and would also give your student an actual claim. I would also, even though that doesn't feel like a special education issue, I would document my concern in the ARD meeting and say, I do not believe that my child can receive a free and appropriate public education in a classroom with a teacher who is openly racist. And I mean, you think about it, I don't know what goals Mrs. Rosales' son, I don't know his age and what his goals or needs are. But say that you had a child who had social skills goals or behavioral goals or transition goals. If they mimic the kind of conduct that this teacher is displaying, then that's going to create all sorts of social challenges for them in the future. It's going to put them in danger of people that they will upset, and it could keep them very easily from being able to get or keep a job. And so I think that there's an argument that that kind of teacher in a repetitive way, engaging in that way, denies your child a free and appropriate public education. And I'd at least say that in an ARD meeting to document the concern and hopefully get the principal to take more action. Additionally, Mrs. Rosales asked, why does a high school only have 1 year of dyslexia? So, you know, one of the things you have to keep in mind here is that in most schools, the idea is that because we have universal screening in Texas, that theoretically we're hoping to catch most kids who need dyslexia interventions at an earlier age. And so honestly, very often we encounter high schools that don't have any dyslexia instruction still available because they assume people should have received it earlier. But obviously we know that there are students who still need it in high school who maybe never got all that they needed or still need more by the time they get to high school. This is one of the big problems with the dyslexia kind of standard protocol of what a child should receive. You know, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the law that protects students in special education, is all about individualized services. So there's nothing standard about it. And yet the dyslexia handbook tries to come up with this standard amount of dyslexia instruction a person receives. I would say it's one of the real reasons that if you're not in special education already, to think about requesting that evaluation to get in special education, and then argue for the amount of instruction that your child actually needs, not concerned about whether it's 1 year or not. I see another question right under that of why do students with disabilities enter UIL and are required to have a, so that's the same question that we've already addressed.
I think that's all. Thank you so much, Dustin, for all the information that you bring to our audience. It was very complete, a lot of information, but You know, all the topics very important to us as parents and professionals working with students with disabilities. Thank you so much for being here. And please share your PDF or something that we can send parents, you know, with all this.
No, I'm happy to
resources.
email it to you right when I get off.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Let me stop the post. So welcome again, everybody. We have the last speaker of the day. We have with us Andy Harwick. He is a retired, right, from the SSI. You work like 20 years or something like that
Actually, I'm still working for SSA. I haven't retired yet. That's going to be in about 2 to 3 months. We're still working that out. I have worked for SSA for over 40 years. The last 20 I've worked in public affairs.
Got it. Because I heard that you had your retired party, so that's why I'm saying that you are retired, but no.
Well, if it was a party, I wasn't invited. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know who did the party, but they forgot to invite me. So
great. Thank you for being here with us and sharing all your knowledge about this important topic for our parents with kids with disabilities and adults with disabilities. We are going to be talking about SSI eligibility and preserving benefits for children and adults with disability. So thank you, Andy.
thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes, we will be talking about 2 disability programs that we have for our beneficiaries. Social Security Disability Insurance, also known as SSDI, and Supplemental Security Income, also known as SSI. So let's talk about how is SSI different from Social Security, because everybody that I meet, or almost everybody, tells me that their child is receiving Social Security benefits. So my answer to that is, are you or your spouse receiving Social Security? No. Has your spouse passed away? No. Does your child have a work history? No. Well, then your child is not receiving Social Security. Okay, and I'll discuss Social Security later on in the presentation. For now, we're going to talk about SSI. So SSI, as was said in the first slide, stands for Supplemental Security Income. It does not mean Social Security income. SSI is a program different from Social Security. You must have limited income and resources or assets. So there's going to be a lot of questions about bank accounts and cars and property and things like that. It's not based, the SSI is not based on work credits. So unlike Social Security, where the person under whom you're filing, or yourself, if you're filing under yourself, you have to have a work history. You have to have worked a certain number of years. That's not true with the SSI. SSI provides Medicaid, okay? And Medicaid is different than Medicare, and I'll discuss that in a few minutes. In order to get SSI, you must be either 65 years old or older, in which case you would not have to prove a disability. But if you're under 65, you have to prove that you are blind or disabled, according to our definition. SSI comes from general revenues, not Social Security trust funds. So it has nothing to do with Social Security. It comes from the funds from your taxes that are used for programs like food stamps and Section 8 housing and things like that. In addition to being blind or disabled, if you're under 65 and having limited income and resources, in most cases, you must be a U.S. citizen to receive SSI. If you're applying for SSI and you are not yet a citizen, you must be a resident who has worked here 10 years. Or if you're a minor child who is not a U.S. citizen, then your parents between them have to have worked here 10 years. In order to receive SSI, you must be residing in the 50 states or the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Okay, you cannot receive SSI outside the United States except in the Northern Mariana Islands, which is somewhere in the South Pacific. Okay, Puerto Rico and St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, for SSI purposes, are not considered part of the US. So you cannot receive SSI if you reside in the Virgin Islands or in Puerto Rico. I just read today about someone had taken the case to the Supreme Court and saying that they should extend SSI to Puerto Rico also. And the Supreme Court decided that the law as it is correct, that in order to extend benefits to Puerto Rico, SSI benefits to Puerto Rico, Congress would have to pass a law extending those benefits there. So if you are not residing in the continental US, forget about receiving SSI. Okay. Now, if you're under 65, as I said, you must prove some kind of disability. If you are 18 or over, you must have a physical or mental impairment that keeps you from performing substantial work. Substantial work, for our definition, means earning at least $1,350 gross per month. So if you apply for SSI and you're earning, for instance, $1,400 a month, you're automatically going to be denied, because we're going to say, well, you're engaging in substantial work, so you don't qualify. Now, there are circumstances where you can earn that amount or more after you become eligible. But when you are first applying, if you're earning over $1,350 gross per month from a job, you automatically will be disqualified from receiving SSI or SSDI, as a matter of fact. You have to have a condition that has lasted or is expected to last at least 12 months. Okay, so if you're in an accident and your doctor says, well, I think in the next 10 or 11 months, this person will recover, that would also be a denial, because your doctor stated that he did not expect this to last 12 months. Now, you don't have to wait 12 months before you apply, but it has to be a condition that has lasted or is expected to last 12 months. For children under 18, they must have marked or severe functional limitations that are expected to last 12 months or result in death. So, for instance, if you are applying for a 12-year-old child, we would look at other 12-year-old children in the community that do not have a disability, and we would see how your child compares to those other children. Can your child feed themselves, dress themselves? Are they toilet trained? Do they respond to commands and things like that? If somebody is alleging blindness, then they have to have corrected vision of 2200 or less in the better eye, or field of vision less than 20 degrees. So how do we decide whether or not a person is disabled? We actually don't make the decision in the Social Security office. Each state has an agency called DDS, Disability Determination Services. They contact the doctors, hospitals, clinics, school districts. They get all those reports and they decide whether or not a person is disabled. They use a manual called Disability Evaluation under Social Security. Nickname is Social Security Blue Book, like the color blue. Okay, so you can, if you Google and you put Social Security Blue Book, you will see this manual online. It's divided into two sections. Section A is adults, section B is children, in other words, people under 18 years old. And you're going to look at the different particular disorder and you'll see what DDS is looking for in order to make a favorable decision. Usually takes 3 to 4 months to get a disability decision, but due to COVID, it's been taking 4 to 5 months. DDS will, when you're filing a disability claim, you don't have to submit all the evidence, like reports from the doctors, things like that. DDS will contact the doctors, hospitals, clinics, and school districts to get that information. We have something under SSI called presumptive disability. Those are 15 different conditions where it's likely that the case will be approved if the person applying for SSI has one of those 15 conditions. Then while DDS is deciding whether or not a person is disabled, we could pay the person SSI conditionally, and we could entitle them to Medicaid. Now, I don't have the list of the 15 in my head, but some of them are like HIV in certain cases, prematurity with low birth weight under a certain number of grams, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, certain types of paralysis. These are some of the 15 different conditions. We also have something called compassionate allowance. Compassionate allowance, now those are over 200 conditions in which we can't pay the person conditionally, but if the person suffers from one of these, then it is possible that DDS could speed up the allowance process and possibly allow the case in 30 days or less. Of course, they would need to get the information confirming the condition, but if a person, so if you go to our website, ssa.gov or socialsecurity.gov, and you type in compassionate allowance, you would see the over 200 different conditions that qualify for this. Now, just because you don't have anything under compassionate allowance or presumptive disability doesn't mean you shouldn't file it. You're not going to be approved. These are just ways of getting a quick decision or getting a temporary payment in Medicaid while you're waiting for a decision. So if you or the person that you're representing doesn't have one of these, that's okay. It's just going to take longer to get a decision. In order to get SSI, you must have limited income. So if you are receiving income from some source and it's higher than $841 a month, then you're not going to be eligible for the SSI program. And there are two types of income for the SSI program. One is unearned and the other one is earned. Unearned income refers to things like pensions, alimony, support payments, rents, interest, annuities. Generally with unearned income, we don't count the first $20 and then the rest is countable. Now with support payments, we don't count 1/3. So if a child is receiving $900 a month in child support, then we would count 600 of that 900. We don't count 1/3 of it. The other 2/3 counts. The rest of the unearned income, we just don't count $20 of it. So if the person is getting Social Security of $920, we don't count the first $20, and then the other 900 would be countable against the SSI of $841. Now, earned income refers to income from work. So that would be wages, self-employment, net earnings, royalties, sheltered workshop payments, things like that. There is a different formula that we use when a person has income from work. Now, resources or assets, it's $2,000 for an individual, $3,000 it's a husband and wife, $4,000 if it's a child under 18 living with one parent, and $5,000 if it's a child under 18 living with two parents. So that means the total number of resources cannot exceed $5,000 if it's a child with two parents. If it's a child by themselves or a child 18 years old or older, then they can't have resources higher than $2,000. However, there are exceptions. The home where a person lives is not countable. But if this is a child under 18 and they live with their parents, but their parents own a second home, the second home is counted toward that limit. In this case, if there were two parents with a child, that would be $5,000. So the second house couldn't be worth more than $5,000. Car, if there's only one car, we don't count it. There's two cars, the more expensive car is not counted. The less expensive counts toward that $2,000 limit. Burial plots, we don't count those. Burial funds, if you have a fund in the bank You can have up to $1,500 as long as it's marked for burial and not used for anything else. That won't be counted. So in addition to the $2,000 limit, you could have a $1,500 account in the bank marked for burial, and then we wouldn't count it. A life insurance, if the face value is $1,500 or less, but as I've said many times before, I don't know who has a life insurance policy for $1,500 or less, because that would probably pay for the hole in the ground. That's about it, literally, and nothing else. But so that any other kind of whole life, we count the cash surrender value. Now, if it's term insurance, we don't count it at all, because term insurance only counts if the person dies. So you can't cash that in ahead of time, unlike whole life. ABLE accounts, a person can have up to $100,000 in an ABLE account, and that would not be countable. You could talk to your bank about that. Now, in an ABLE account, you're limited to a deposit of $16,000 per year. So if several people put into that ABLE account, maybe a child's grandparents and other relatives, the total number of deposits or amount in the deposits can't be over $16,000 per year. Now, special needs trust, need to talk to an attorney about that. You can have an unlimited amount of money in a special needs trust, but those monies can only be used for certain purposes. So again, with the ABLE account, $100,000, that money can be used for housing, education, healthcare, transportation, assistive technology, personal support services, job training, and other things. And as I said, the total sum of the contributions per year can't be over $16,000. Now, as long as a person is under 18, we are counting some of the parents' income and assets as though they were the child's. That's called deeming. But once a person turns 18, that's no longer the case. So once a person turns 18, even though they're still living with their parents and still dependent on their parents, we're now treating that child as an adult, and we're only counting what they have, not what their parents have. So once a child reaches 18, how do we determine how much money they're going to get from SSI? Well, we look at things like sharing of expenses, rental liability, separate purchase and preparation of food, home ownership, things like that. Those can affect whether the person gets from SSI maybe $600 something or $841. Now, SSI, remember, since it is an assistance program, that $841 can also be reduced by other income. So if a person has other income, that will reduce the SSI. And like I said, even if they have no other income other than the SSI, what they get from SSI depends on their living arrangements once they turn age 18. As I said before, in most states, if you're eligible for SSI, you're also eligible for Medicaid. You don't have to file an application for Medicaid. It's just automatic. Now, Medicaid is not portable. So if you take your child or someone on SSI for a visit to another state, that's okay. Texas Medicaid would still pay for it, or whatever state you live in would still pay for it. However, if you move to another state, the month of the move, you can still use the Medicaid from your former home state. So if somebody from Texas moves to Illinois in April, Texas Medicaid will still cover any medical expenses in Illinois for the month of April. But once May comes, you need the Medicaid from Illinois or whatever new state the person is living in. So how do you get that? You have to notify Social Security. We're going to determine the living arrangements in the new state to see what the SSI amount will be in the new state. And we will send a referral to the Medicaid office so that for the following month, the person on SSI can have the Medicaid from the new state. Now, people who get SSI get a review, a non-medical review of their case every 1, 2, or 3 years. So depending on if they're working or if it's a minor living with working parents, or one of the parents is working, that case might be reviewed every year because there's a probability that there'll be change in income. So otherwise, the review will be maybe every 2 or 3 years. It can be done in the office or by phone. Most likely it will be done by phone. Okay. Now, if you don't respond to the request to do the review either by phone or come to the office and do it in person, the SSI and the Medicaid will be suspended until that review can be done. We also have a medical review, which is done every 3, 5, or 7 years, depending on the person's age. Now, I'm sorry, depending on the person's disability, not their age. There is one exception though. If a person was getting SSI prior to age 18, once they turn 18, they will have a medical review of their case. Why? Because now DDS is going to be looking at adult standards and seeing if this person can do any type of substantial work in spite of their disability. Now, remember I told you that if a person was working when they applied for SSI and their gross earnings were over $1,350, they would be denied, okay? However, we have programs under SSI called work incentives to encourage people to go to work, okay? Now, these work incentives are intended to give a person extra income and to see if the person can work. In some cases, the person may be able to go to work and earn what a person without a disability earns and come off the programs altogether. But even if they're not able, chances are they could stay on and have this extra income to supplement their SSI. And some of these work incentive programs are impairment-related work expenses, blind work expenses, plan for achieving self-support, continued Medicaid eligibility, and student earned income exclusion. So for instance, impairment-related work expense, if a person is getting, is working and they receive SSI, but in order to go to work, they have to spend a certain amount of money for transportation, and they have to use special transportation because they can't get to work using public transportation. That might be, if that's approved by SSA as an impairment related work expense, then whatever they spend on transportation would not be counted, would be subtracted from their wages. So it means that portion of the wages wouldn't be counted. So for instance, if a person were earning $700 a month gross wages, but $300 were spent for special transportation, and we approved that expense, then instead of counting the 700, we would just count 400, because they used 300 for special transportation. So that part of their income would not be counted. That means the reduction in their SSI would be much less. And you can include as a work expense medications, residential modifications, and other expenses, but they must be approved by SSA. Another is a plan for achieving self-support. Remember, I told you that with unearned income, in other words, income not generated from work, we don't count the first $20, but then the rest is counted. So if a person came to us and they were getting Social Security of $1,020 a month, well, if we don't count $20, we're still counting 1,000. Well, 1,000 from 841, which is the maximum amount of SSI, gives you a minus figure. So this person wouldn't be eligible for SSI. But suppose this person applying for SSI said, well, you know, I've always wanted to go to college. I want to be a teacher. And I talk with the folks at the university, and they told me that between tuition and fees, it would average out about $1,000 a month for the whole year. So about $12,000 a year. All right. So they write up a plan for achieving self-support. And they say, well, my vocational goal is to be a teacher. It's going to take me 4 years. The 1,000 that I'm getting from Social Security, $1,020, I'm going to use that toward my education for tuition and fees. If we approve that, that means that while they're in college, we're not going to count that money that they're getting from Social Security. So that means that they could then apply for SSI and possibly be eligible for $841 a month and Medicaid, besides getting the $1,000 or $1,020 they get from Social Security. All right. So this is how this is another program that we have. Also, if a person is working and they're using some of their work income from to pay for their education, well, then that part of the work income that they're using to pay for their education wouldn't be counted against them. So if they were earning $800 a month from work gross, but $500 a month was for their education, that means we would only count $300. We would start with $300, and then there's additional things that we wouldn't count. So that means that their SSI check would be reduced by a lot more, or possibly not be reduced at all. We also have for SSI a student earned income exclusion. If we have a full-time student who is under 22 and working, all right, we could actually not count up to $2,040 per month of their income until they reach $8,230. Once they reach that amount, then we count most of their other income from work. But for even if they were earning about $2,000 a month for about 4.5 months, we wouldn't be counting anything. So that means they would be getting their full SSI check and still could be getting $2,000 a month in wages. This is called the student student earned income exclusion. For this, the SSI recipient must be under 22 and must be a full-time student. Okay, so for the SSI program, you must report any change in income, resources, living arrangements. Let us know if you leave the US. All right, if a person on SSI leaves the United States, let's say for vacation, if they're absent for 30 days or longer, then we must suspend their SSI and their Medicaid until they are back in the US for 30 days. So if they leave for vacation of 3 weeks, it's okay if they leave the US. But if they leave on a vacation for 5 weeks, well, once their absence exceeds 30 days, then we're going to have to stop the SSI and Medicaid until they're back in the US 30 days. Please let us know about changes of address and phone number. A lot of times, because people have direct deposit, they don't think they need to let us know their new phone number or their new address. And that's not correct, because every once in a while we have to contact the person and we need to have the latest contact information available. Okay. So how do you apply? Go to socialsecurity.gov or ssa.gov. You can always do the medical part of the SSI application online. Okay, now the non-medical part, if the child is under 18, or if you applied for the person before, then, or the person is married, you won't be able to do the non-medical portion online. But for that, you'll call either the 800 number or your local Social Security office, and they will give you an application date, probably to take this by phone. Although, as of now, Social Security offices are open. You can walk in. I don't advise it. If you are going to walk in, I advise that you make an appointment first, because your waiting time will be much, much less. All right, so let's talk about Social Security. We talked about SSI. SSI comes on the first of the month. The highest amount is $841 in most states, and it gives you Medicaid. Social Security is based on wages. So either you're getting Social Security under a parent who's receiving Social Security, or who's passed away with enough work credits, or because you're on your own, because you worked and got a certain number of work credits. So now you're eligible for your own Social Security. So children with disabilities can only draw Social Security on a parent's record if the parent is receiving Social Security or the parent has passed away with enough Social Security credits. Now, any child under 18 whose parent is either getting Social Security or passed away with enough work credits can get Social Security under their parent. They don't have to prove a disability, okay? I received Social Security survivor benefits when my dad passed away, okay? And I, not as a disabled person, but just by virtue of being the child of the worker, okay? So any child under 18, if their parent passes away or their parent starts getting Social Security, can receive benefits. Those benefits continue until 18. Now at 18, if the caregiver or the person themselves notifies us that this 18-year-old has a disability, then if that disability is approved, that 18-year-old is now classified as a disabled adult child. If they're single and have a disability, then they continue receiving benefits under their parent, but now as a disabled adult child. Okay, so SSA does not make a medical determination for someone getting Social Security until they reach 18. So all children under 18, even if they have a disability, are receiving Social Security under their parent, okay, or their own if they've worked. Well, no, let me change that. They're getting under a parent by virtue of being a minor, okay? But once they turn 18, in order to continue receiving those benefits under a parent or their own because they have a work history, then we make a disability determination. Even if a child is 29 years old when one of their parents passes away or starts getting Social Security, right? We can entitle that 29-year-old to Social Security under their parent if they can show that their disability began before age 22. Right? And after 2 years, the disabled adult child receives Medicare. Okay, so SSI gives you Medicaid, Social Security gives you Medicare. Can you get Social Security and SSI at the same time? Yes, you can. If your Social Security is low enough, if your Social Security is under $861, you could get SSI. Maybe not a whole lot, but even if you're eligible for $1 under SSI, you would have Medicaid coverage. And the Social Security depends on the amount of money the person under whom they're filing was earning before they became disabled. So if it's under one of the parents, could be any amount, could be $300 a month, could be $1,200 a month. Okay. Okay. Now, sometimes we have a situation where a young person is on SSI and Medicaid, and now because one of the parents died or became eligible for Social Security, the child is switched over to SSDI, to Social Security Disability Income. If the child is 18 years old or older and they lost their SSI because they came on SSDI, on Social Security Disability Insurance, under their parent, okay, as long as they keep the SSI rules, even though they won't be seeing an SSI check, as long as they keep the SSI rules, they will continue with their Medicaid. And this is important. Why? Because people who are on Social Security disability have to be on it 2 years before they get Medicare, right? So if a person doesn't have Medicaid and they come on Social Security disability, they have to wait 2 years before they come on Medicare, right? So this way, if the young person, 18 years old or older, can keep their Medicaid, that's a good thing, because that will cover their medical expenses until the Medicare kicks in 2 years. Now, then they have a choice. They can stay on Medicaid and Medicare, and then in that case, Medicaid would pay for the premiums and deductibles of the Medicare program. Okay. Otherwise, Medicare, like Part B, is $170.10 every month. That covers the doctor benefits under Medicare. Medicaid doesn't charge you for coverage. All right. So if a young person is able to work, then gradually they're going to get enough credits where Social Security is going to contact them and tell them to apply for their SSDI. Now, of course, if the parent later becomes disabled or starts getting some kind of Social Security benefit or passes away, if the benefit under the parent is greater than what the child can get in their own SSDI benefits because of their own work, they'll be able to switch over. Okay, so Social Security provides retirement, survivor, and disability benefits to workers and their families. For retirement benefits, you have to be at least 62 years old. For disability, you could be any age. And survivors are people whose spouse or whose parent has passed away. Okay, so for widow or widowers, you'd have to be at least 50 years old if you're disabled, 60 if you're not disabled. Or you could be younger than that if you have children under 16 in your care. Kids can get benefits up until 18 unless they have a disability, and then those benefits can continue. Okay, so Medicare has 4 parts, A, B, C, and D. A is free. That generally covers the first 60 days in the hospital, but there is a deductible. Part B is $170.10. That comes out of a person's Social Security check. That pays for 80% of the doctor visits. Okay, now A and B do not cover prescription drugs. So if you have a traditional A and B, what's called original Medicare, you need a Part C, which is a prescription drug plan. And for that, you don't come to us because Social Security will automatically enroll you in Medicare once you're on disability for 2 years. You'll get the Medicare card, the red, white, and blue card through the mail. So that Medicare card is the same card we give to seniors, because normally you have to be 65 years old or older to enroll in Medicare. But if you're on disability, you could be any age. Once you're on for 24 months, we enroll you in Medicare. So if you want a prescription drug plan and you have A and B, you can sign up for C, but you don't come to us. You go to Medicare.gov, and then you can sign up for a drug plan there, a plan which covers all or most of the drugs you take. I'm sorry, I apologize. That's Part D. Part D. Part C is a Medicare Advantage plan. Part C is, for instance, if you want to save money and you want to have something that has A, B, and D incorporated in it. Most C plans, if they're a Medicare Advantage plan, they have drug coverage in them. So if you have somebody who has A and B and they also signed up for D, and D is not free either, D is about $30 a month, and there's deductibles and copays. So if you have someone on A, B, and D, and they want to see if there's some way they can save money, they might sign up for Medicare Part C, and that's also through Medicare, not through Social Security, Medicare.gov. And then in that case, they could drop the D, because the C, if it's a Medicare Advantage plan, would include a drug plan in it. All right. Now, some people like C, some people don't, because in many cases, the Medicare Advantage plan, it's like an HMO, so you have to use the doctors in network. So maybe your favorite specialist is not in that plan, which means if you continue going to that specialist, Medicare is not going to cover it unless they are in the plan. Okay. So here's our website, socialsecurity.gov or ssa.gov. Either one will work. Here's the 800 number, 1-800-772-1213. Now that's Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. All right. Now the Medicare number is 1-800-Medicare, whatever the letters Medicare stand for. Now that's a 24/7 number that you can call on weekends. You can call in midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. You will get a live person. Now, if you're trying to reach Medicare, I suggest you not call during the day. Call in the evening on weekends, because somebody will be there to take care of you. You won't have that much competition as you do during the regular working day, 9 to 5. All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions. If somebody has some, I see in the question and answer. Okay, this is in Spanish, so I'll read it in Spanish and then I'll translate it. Si mi hijo de 14 años está en SSI, mi hija ya cumplió 18, ella puede ser su representante en SSA y cambiar a SSDI. Ambos son ciudadanos. Mi pregunta es por qué ella irá a la universidad dentro del mismo Houston, vivirá allá entre semana y fines de semana en casa, pero mi hija comenzará a trabajar y el ingreso cambiará. Ambos son ciudadanos. Yo no quiero perder el SSI por este nuevo ingreso. Okay, so she's saying she has a son that's 14 and a daughter that's 18, and she wants to know if her daughter starts working, is that going to affect the SSI of her son? No, it's not. We don't count income of siblings. So if we have a person that's on SSI and he or she is under 18 and their brother or sister is working, that's not going to affect. The only thing that's going to affect them is the parent income until that child turns 18. And then once they turn 18, it doesn't matter what the parents earn after that. That's not going to affect the child. So, en este caso, si el muchacho tiene 14 años y la hermana tiene 18, los ingresos y los recursos de los hermanos no cuentan contra la cantidad de SSI que recibe el joven. ¿Okay? Nada más contamos los ingresos y los recursos de los padres hasta que el niño cumple los 18 años. Al cumplir los 18 años, ya lo de los padres no cuenta. Pero en este caso, lo de la hermana no va a contar nunca, porque es hermana, no es madrastra ni es madre. Así que los ingresos de su hija, en este caso, la hija de la persona que hizo la pregunta, no van a contar. Okay. So that's that. Now let's see in the chat box, we have, what happens if you change to another state? If you change to another state, you must notify Social Security, and then we will send a referral to the Medicaid office. Now, if the child is under 18, we're again going to ask if you move to another state, did the parent get a new job? Are they earning another income? Is it different people in the household now? So the same thing, even if they're over 18, we're also going to say how many people are in the household now? What are the expenses of if they're 18 or over? What are the expenses of the new household? How much of the child's or of the person's SSI check is being used to pay the rent, food, utilities, things like that. So as soon as you, not before, as soon as you move, you must notify us that you're in a new state, or the person that you represent is in a new state. We'll ask a series of questions. We'll send a referral to the Medicaid office. So you will be sent to the mail a Medicaid card for the new state for the following month. Okay, so please notify us as soon as possible.
I think that's it. I don't see more questions. Guys, this is the time if you have questions for Andy. It's a good time to do that. Andy, can you stop sharing?
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, let me do that.
Okay, I see another question.
My daughter is 32 years old and she is on SSI since 22. If she started working at a cafe this year, specialized for disability, how much can she earn per month so it won't jeopardize her SSI and her Medicaid? Okay, well, it depends. She can roughly earn about a little over $1,600 before the SSI is reduced to 0. Okay, but as long as she earns over, as long as she gets at least $1 from SSI, we can give her the Medicaid. However, there's also a program actually in the state of Texas. You can actually earn over $30,000 and still be on, well, you wouldn't be getting any SSI. You're technically on the SSI program, but we would still give you Medicaid coverage if the person needs Medicaid coverage. So if a person starts working, even though that work may start to reduce their SSI, even if they get to a point where their SSI is reduced to 0, as long as they tell us, I still need, the insurance I get through my employer is not going to cover all my expenses. I still need the Medicaid. Then under the 1619B provision, we can still keep them on the SSI program. So that, like, let's say the person says, well, I got some bad news from my employer. They're laying everybody off at the end of the month. So starting May, I won't have any income, which means then that we could then their SSI check would start back up again, because they never got off the program in the first place. What I recommend to parents is that you go to Google and you type in Social Security Red Book. Remember, I told you the Blue Book is the one that has the rules on whether or not you're disabled or how we decide. The Red Book is the one that talks about the work incentives. What kind of programs do we have for people on SSI or SSDI or both programs that they can use where they can work and stay on the program until they're able to become completely independent, or if not, at least have some extra income to supplement their SSI. So if they use these programs, there's less likely a chance that they're going to be cut off of SSI. And while they're working and using these programs, their SSI is not going to be reduced as much, or maybe it won't be reduced at all. Thank you, Evelyn, for your kind comments. I'll miss you. Congratulations. Well, not yet, until I still have to sign the paperwork. It's coming, but thank you very much. Okay, my son is 10 and receives SSI. I'm in the process of selling my parents' home. The sale of the property would be divided with myself and my siblings. I will be receiving a large amount of money. Will this cause my son to be? Yes, it will, unless you use the money that you got from the sale to purchase a house where you and your son are going to live. Okay, so if this is your parents' home and they sell it, but part of that money goes to you, you have to use that money to purchase an excluded resource. So if you got, houses are worth so much money now, but if you use the money to purchase a home where you and your son would be living, then that wouldn't be counted. So that would be okay. But remember, if it's just you and your son living there, there's not another parent. Between you and your son, the resources can't exceed $4,000. So that means that after that home is sold, once you receive the $4,000, well, 4,000, I mean, whatever amount of 400,000 or whatever you get for the house. Remember, if that money, you don't turn around and use that money to buy a house, that's going to make your son ineligible for SSI, because remember, since he's under 18, whatever income and resources or assets you have will be counted as though they were his. See, if this had happened and he was around 18, we wouldn't care. You could receive any amount of money in, but this, yes, it will affect, because I'm assuming he's living with you, and that would, so I will use the money to purchase a home, but we'll have 500. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Go to a special needs trust, Andy.
Yeah, special needs trust. You could put it in a special needs trust. And then in that case, nothing will be, then that would not affect him. But that money can only be used for certain kind of expenses. Yes, but you're right. Yeah, certain special needs trust would be okay.
I think that's it.
Okay. A query for
Oh,
SSI caregivers. As a
wow.
parent, I worked long enough to qualify for SSI no. As a parent, you work long enough to qualify for Social Security. Remember, SSI doesn't require work credits. Social Security does. But after my disabled child was born, I left the workforce. Social Security is stating my payments will be reduced since I am no longer earning work credits. We want to ensure our children are covered. Okay, Social Security is stating my payments will be reduced. I don't know what that means. Why would they, which payments are you getting? If you're no longer earning work credits, well, I mean, okay, while you're working, Social Security will, well, if you're 60 or over, or if you go online, if you have a My Social Security account, you can get an estimate of what you would get when you retire. If you stop working, then you get a revised estimate, because when we do the estimate, we assume that you're going to be working at least until 62 years old. But that may not be true. After you work 10 years, you have enough credits. You have enough work credits to eventually retire. Of course, you got to wait till you're 62, but see, there's a difference. If I work until I'm 62, or I stop working, let's say when I'm 50, all right, that's going to make a difference, because when Social Security calculates Social Security benefits, they use your highest 35 years. Well, the person that worked until 62, they have 35 years of work. Person that stopped at 50, chances are they have maybe 20 years of work, but they have 15 years of zero. So that's going to lower their amount. So if I'm interpreting this correct, that means that the person may have gotten one estimate because we assumed they would work until 62, but now they stopped working. So we're giving them a lower estimate of benefit. That's true. But on the other hand, if they start working again, then they're going to get a higher estimate of benefits. So my contact in the email, yeah, I'll put it in there. And it's andy.hardwick@ssa.gov. So you can still contact me by email, and I'll be glad to try and answer your questions or try and help you out. Okay, so it's andy.hardwick@ssa.gov. There's a V behind the go there, but it could be contained in the same line. So andy.hardwick@ssa.gov. And you're welcome to send me any questions you have, and I'll try to help you out.
All right. It says a correct interpretation of the question.
So that will have a 30-year gap in income. Well, yeah, okay. If you work 10 years and never work again, you will get your Social Security. But if you just had 10 years, remember, we use 35 years. So you're going to have, it's like your teacher saying, I'm going to average 35 of your test scores to determine what your grade is. So on the first 10 tests, you got 100. So you got 100 average so far, but you missed the next 25 tests. Are all those zeros for missing the test, they're going to affect your 100 average? Yes, they are. It's the same with Social Security. So if I have 30 years when I retire, Social Security is going to use all 30 years to calculate my benefit, but I'll have 5 years of zero. Now, the good news is if I keep working or I get another job, every year I keep working, Social Security takes out a 0 year and puts in what I made and then recalculates my benefit. So even if you don't have the 35 years, as long as you have 10 years, you're going to get Social Security. But if you have any 0 years, or if you have your 35 years, but what you're making, you're still working, and what you're making for the year is higher than one of those 35 years, we will take out the lowest year, put in what you made for the year, and recalculate your benefit. And that will happen forever and ever as long as you keep on working. So as long as you keep on working, if one of the years we use is a 0, or one of the years we use is lower than what you're making now, we'll take out your lowest year and put in what you made for the year. And that will happen every year as long as you keep on working.
All right. No more question, guys. All right. I'm going to stop then the recording.